Chapter 984 Active Response. Klein didn't directly teleport back to 160 Buckland Street. Instead, he went to sea with Anuni, found a secluded spot, and chanted the honorific name of the fool. Then, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the grey fog. With a beckon, he summoned a paper figurine. Immediately after that, he picked up one of the cards of blasphemy on the long bronze table in front of him, and he placed it inside his body. Klein suddenly had an additional dark red robe. This appearance seemed to look like rust and settled gunpowder that had been stained by copious amounts of blood. As for his face, it was covered by a dark gold mask. The patterns on it were ancient and set off a contrasting appearance with the crown he wore that was embedded with gems that sparkled red, blue, and green. This was a change that the Red Priest card brought about. After repeated experiments, Klein had confirmed that certain traits of the Red Angel card were very compatible with the Paper Angel's interference effect with fate. It allowed the relevant powers of the mysterious space above the grey fog to be further enhanced. Therefore, he had chosen it instead of the Black Emperor or Tyrant cards. After completing this, Klein, in the form of the Red Priest, picked up a paper figurine and shook it. He then fused it with the grey fog that surged over, throwing it at the rippling blob of light that represented him offering a prayer. The paper figurine quickly burgeoned, turning into an angel bathed in golden light. Flames crisscrossed behind it, taking on the form of 12 pairs of wings. This war angel then used the secret connection that was generated from a prayer to descend upon the world and enveloped Klein and Anuni with its fiery wings. Only with this done did Klein relax. Putting down the Red Priest card, he returned to the real world. He first sought out food for creeping hunger before returning to 160 Buckland Street with Anuni. One transformed back into Dwayne Dantes, while the other turned into a young man with mixed blood. After combing his hair, Klein walked to the balcony of his master bedroom. Looking far into the distance where Mock's residence stood, he discovered that the place remained brightly lit, a clear indication that the ball hadn't truly ended. Typically, a ball continued until midnight, and of course, people were permitted to leave before then. After all, most people that were willing to dance late into the night were young adults. Phew. Amon is truly terrifying. Just a battle involving a Marauder Pathways demigod was enough to garner his attention, even if one was in the city and the other was in the suburbs. At his level, the law of beyonder characteristic convergence should be extremely substantial. Yes, I can't eliminate the possibility that the demigod's mutation while being on the brink of losing control had caught Amon's notice. Klein couldn't help but recall everything that had happened, afraid that he would find a thin, monocle-wearing young, refined man sitting in the reclining chair behind him while sipping from a glass of red wine when he turned around. He felt lucky that he had already become a demigod and could converge the aura of the grey fog to prevent beyonders of particular pathways from detecting it. Otherwise, with the interest Amon had shown in the past, his focus definitely would have been placed on Gehrman Sparrow instead of the Marauder Pathway demigod. If that had been the case, he might not have left so successfully by teleporting, as the Amon in Backland was likely only an avatar. Klein was still rather confident of the Paper Angel's interference. He believed that this King of Angels had no means to trace him all the way to 160 Buckland Street from a trail of breadcrumbs, and also determined that he was Dwayne Dantes. But this still didn't ease his mind. This was because the Marauder Pathway demigod was involved in Buckland Street as well. She had encountered Admiral of Blood here and had been forced to trigger the explosives, finally parasitizing a rat. Here, she had been warned by a mirror, learning about the Marauder Pathway Angel who was in need of replenishments and that blasphemer Amon was on the way. As she had refused to answer the mirror's question, she was struck by lightning, and had to move to Moose Manor. In addition, Hazel, the target she attempted to parasitize but was her student on the surface, was influenced by a powerful illusion tonight, exposing her teacher's condition. All of these factors combined might make Amon pay a visit. The more Klein thought about it, the more unsafe he found Buckland Street. From his point of view, just the warning about a Marauder Pathway Angel in desperate need for replenishments was enough for Amon to take up residence in Buckland Street for a period of time. Of course, there was an extremely small chance that the Marauder Pathway demigod escaped and that nothing was divulged. However, Klein believed it was impossible. After all, even he had the confidence of handling the matter himself, much less Amon, who had a certain level of control over Marauder Pathway existences. Sigh, I shouldn't have been wary against the grandpa in Leonard. If I wasn't worried that he would achieve another stage of recovery and cause Leonard harm, everything would have been settled rather quickly. I wouldn't be in this situation of attracting Amon. What do I do next? Regardless, I need to do something. Otherwise, Not only will my identity as Dwayne Dantes be at risk, I might even implicate Leonard on Pinster Street and the ordinary people on Buckland Street. Who knows if Amon will suddenly parasitize them or not? As Klein's thoughts whirled, his expression grew heavy as he began seriously considering eliminating Amon's avatar. His first idea was to establish contact with Leonard and come up with a plan with the grandpa in him, Palez Zoroast. With this marauder angel's knowledge of Amon who shared the same pathway, it was likely that Heap could come up with a good plan. Klein immediately took out his pen and paper in preparation to write. But after making a few scribbles with the fountain pen, he paused. He found the confidentiality lacking because describing in detail might result in having an effect on fate, allowing Amon to notice it ahead of time. The more secure method would be to pull Leonard above the gray fog. The discussion can be held there and have him relay it and discuss it with Palez Zoroast. Apart from this, what else can be done? Report it to the church and get them to disinfect all of Backland? Klein put down his fountain pen and muttered silently as he considered other proposals. He soon gave up the thought of reporting Amon, because Leonard hadn't done so previously. With the understanding that the grandpa in him had of blasphemer Amon, it implied that this method was useless. Either there was a huge flaw, or it might end up affecting oneself. It's better to ask Leonard first and gain a better situation of the exact situation before coming to a decision. Klein quickly made up his mind. He temporarily suppressed the urge to draw the symbol to Aska Rhodes or use the paper crane to contact Snake of Fate Willa Septon. After dismissing Anuni, he entered the master bedroom's bathroom, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and arrived above the gray fog. Sitting at the seat of the fool, Klein conjured the world Gairman Sparrow and made the fake person pray piously. Honorable Mr. Fool, please inform Leonard Mitchell that I've discovered traces of blasphemer Amon. I hope that he can head to your kingdom as soon as possible to discuss the subsequent actions. The time will be up to him to decide. After throwing the prayer's content into the crimson star representing Leonard, Klein added as the fool, there's no need to hide it from Palez Zoroast. In the outskirts of Northborough, in a sparse forest, Leonard extended his right hand and held down a blurry wild wolf's figure. The wolf whimpered as the flames burning in its eyes dissipated, returning to normal. Its body faded away and vanished into the wind. However, it no longer had the bloodthirsty feeling it previously exuded. All was calm and serene. In the northern continent, after the Pale Era, the 7 Orthodox churches, along with the various nations, jointly pushed for a cemetery burial act which had been strictly carried out to this day. As the number of humans that turned into ghosts were rare, the only exception involved the difficult-to-detect deaths in the slums or drowning victims that couldn't be fished out in time. However, the spirits of the deceased weren't only limited to humans. All kinds of wild animals and all kinds of creatures with spirituality could become specters under certain conditions. Furthermore, it was impossible for them to head to human cemeteries to have themselves interred. This often resulted in rumors of ghost sightings in the wild. Just as he put the wild wolf to rest, Leonard suddenly saw a boundless grayish-white fog appear before his eyes as the world Gairman Sparrow's prayers resounded in his ears. Traces of blasphemer Amon. He is still in Backland. Leonard's eyelids twitched as he tensed up immediately. As he had received Mr. Fool's instructions, he didn't hesitate to speak with a suppressed voice. Old man, did you see it? Did you hear it? Palez Zoroast's slightly aged voice resounded once again. No, although I sensed an anomaly, I didn't see or hear anything. It will only happen if I deepen my parasitization of you, allowing me to directly control your astral projection. Do you think I'm a fool? From the looks of it, Mr. Fool's response is done through the astral projection. Leonard thought before he said in deliberation. Old man, Klein informed me via Mr. Fool that he has discovered traces of Amon. He wants me to head over to Mr. Fool's kingdom to discuss this matter. Do you have any suggestions? Palez Zoroast fell silent for a few seconds before he let out a long sigh. If he wishes to deal with Amon's avatar in Backland, tell him that unless he has the blessings of concealment, the outcome will be as you expect it to be. By saying this, Old Man is giving preconditions. He means that he will only be willing to cooperate with the blessings of concealment? Leonard's mind raced as he immediately found a dark corner and informed the world Klein via prayer that he could do it immediately. As for the danger that resulted from losing control of his body in the wilderness, Leonard wasn't worried since he still had a marauder pathway angel in his body. Before long, he saw a crimson tide surge towards him and inundate him. Chapter 985 Blessed of concealment above the boundless grayish white. Inside the magnificent palace. Just as Leonard Mitchell's figure appeared to the side of the long bronze table, he subconsciously stood up and wanted to bow to Mr. Fool. However, when he looked over, he found the seat empty. No one was sitting there. Doesn't Mr. Fool usually sit there? A thought flashed through Leonard's mind as he cast his gaze to the other end of the long mottled table. The world was sitting there silently as though he was fused with the grey fog in an indistinct blur. There's only the two of us. There's no need to deliberately use Gairman Sparrow's appearance, Leonard casually said to the world as he sat back down. After discovering Mr. Fool's absence, he instantly became relaxed. He wasn't as reserved as he was in the previous tarot gathering, just short of throwing his leg up on the table. It's a habit, Klein replied succinctly. Leonard nodded in thought. I heard that Gairman Sparrow's persona at sea is a cold, reserved, refined, and polite person. Your current performance matches that description very well. However, you wasn't like this in the past, Klein. You have to remember that you're only acting. Do not be affected by your persona as Gairman Sparrow. Hey, I pulled you up here to discuss Amon, not to have a chat. Why do you show so little concern towards your grandpa's matters? Klein had indeed made it a habit to use the world's persona in such situations. But when this was pointed out by Leonard, he was a little embarrassed to change back into his original appearance. He tersely acknowledged that he would keep it in mind. Did Palaz Zoros teach you about the part that you're only acting? Yes, Leonard answered frankly. This grandpa seems pretty good. He mentioned such crucial information to Leonard. Compared to him, the rat demigod from before was really up to no good. She didn't teach Hazel any of the most common knowledge. Even if she did, she distorted some of it. Heh, no matter how unaffiliated you are, how could they not know anything at the level of a demigod? Even that half-crazy sea serpent, Calvetua, knew how to respond to rituals or obtain sacrificial items. It even knew some theurgy and how to perform bestowments. Klein established a first impression of Palaz Zorost. However, he wasn't hasty to make a judgment. After all, fishing was an activity that required bait. Just one instance didn't prove much. Seeing Klein being silent, Leonard cut the small talk and got down to business. Where did you discover traces of blasphemer, Amon? Klein went straight to the point. I was pursuing a demigod of the Marauder pathway, who was on the brink of losing control. However, I ended up encountering Amon in the outskirts of Backlund. All I could do was use Mr. Fool's powers to directly escape. Amon's avatar really is still in Backlund. Leonard sighed before he asked in a rather curious and desultory manner. Why were you pursuing a Marauder pathway demigod who's on the brink of losing control? After he asked the question, he realized something and swiftly added, if it involves some plans of Mr. Fool, pretend as though I never asked. Why? Isn't dealing with Beyonders on the brink of losing control, or those who have lost control, the duty of a Nighthawk? Klein sighed when he heard Leonard's question. It stirred up memories of his time in Tingen City. In that short 2+ months, he had handled many similar matters. It included the mandated punisher of the Church of Storms who turned into a monster, Hood Eugen's loss of control, and Old Neil's corruption by the Hidden Sage. Although they were only a handful, they left a deep impression on him. It drilled certain actions deep to the bone. Therefore, after taking into account everything that he knew, and coming to the conclusion that the Marauder pathway demigod was on the brink of losing control after rabidly biting someone, he didn't hesitate and used his illusion from downstairs. From that, he gained confirmation from Hazel and didn't even wait a day or two to make preparations. All he did was do a divination above the grey fog and came up with a rough plan before taking action. Such matters were emergencies for him. In addition, Klein had long had the intention of getting rid of the Marauder pathway demigod because the malintent she had shown when dealing with Hazel was obvious. Furthermore, she had tried to entice Miss Magician to seek out treasure that was in actual fact a trap. If he wasn't a demigod back then, which meant a great difference in strength, he would have taken action back then. Besides, he was also afraid that he would trigger unnecessary accidents. It was precisely because of this that he followed his predetermined plan to eliminate her once he confirmed the Marauder pathway demigod's condition. The first stage of his plan was to lure the enemy out of Moose Manor to prevent her from producing her incomplete mythical creature form before dying, as that would have affected the ordinary people. The result was pretty satisfactory. With himself as the bait, he achieved his goal, but he failed to use the air cannon bombardment to finish the battle. This made the Marauder pathway demigod flee into the woods and parasitize a tree. Klein actually had a second stage to his plan, and had even prepared contingencies in the event he failed to eliminate her. To his surprise, Amon suddenly appeared, making him terminate all his plans and flee without any hesitation. Klein's contingency was to let a marionette escape the battlefield and write to the experimental demigod byproduct of the numinous episcopate, Patrick Bryan, to get his help. This undying likely possessed the ability to traverse the spirit world after all. And if there were any additional unforeseen circumstances, he could summon Miss Messenger and make payment after the deed. As his memories surfaced, Klein replied to Leonard with a sighing tone, "A secret." After pausing for a second, he asked, "Why didn't you find an opportunity to inform the Church of Evernight about the arrival of Amon's avatar in Backlund?" Leonard hurriedly gave an explanation, indicating that if Amon's actual body were to arrive, a deity's descent was almost certain. He also explained that Amon could use the death of his avatar to see the corresponding changes in destiny, thus finding the source of the stir and figuring out the activity range of the mastermind. It was also Amon's style to circle about a superficial avatar but hide a dozen, dozens, or hundreds of avatars. Amon's avatars could parasitize all kinds of creatures with spirituality. If one wasn't a demigod, they wouldn't even notice the parasite. Towards the end, Leonard informed Klein in detail about the example old man had raised of how Amon would steal one's destiny. This sent a chill running down Klein's back, thankful that he hadn't been rash in dealing with Amon. Otherwise, Mr. Fool might have been replaced. It's no wonder Leonard didn't report the matter. For Amon to appear so openly, he is actually fishing. Furthermore, he has even more avatars hiding in secret, and he can parasitize the microbes in the air. This alone sends my scalp tingling. The creatures I can control at the moment can't even reach that state. The smaller the creature, the harder it is to see the spirit body threads. It's quite a special case. Sigh, I can't use the Church's power, unless it's done by someone who is without any problems in every aspect. Klein commiserated as he gained a deeper understanding of Amon's terror. It left him a deeper impression. From his point of view, Leonard was an excellent candidate to report the matter to the Church of Evernight, but with Pallas Zoroast parasitizing him, he didn't dare expose his existence to Amon. In addition, the hanged man could also shoulder this responsibility, but he was unable to provide the source of the news. This meant problems that deserved deeper investigations into. One choice after another flashed across Klein's mind. Finally, he paused on himself his identities as Klein Moretti and Gehrman Sparrow. As a blessed of Evernight, it's entirely reasonable for me to inform the Church about Amon's appearance in Backlund. Amon won't be able to pick faults with that. And having involved myself with the battle with the Marauder Pathway demigod tonight, as the bizarro sorcerer who witnessed Amon and is now in possession of the knowledge that the Angel of Time's avatar is here in Backlund, it's also very normal and not something that will garner Amon's suspicion. At the same time, as I'm a blessed of Evernight, just the loss of an avatar likely won't incur his full wrath for revenge. After all, he might be facing a very possible Trape deity's descent. Having a backer really feels good. However, a price is always exacted for what fate bestows. Klein quickly came to a conclusion over the matter. Then, he habitually changed his point of view and began considering this matter from Amon's point of view. Amon is definitely no stranger to bizarro sorcerers. He can determine my pathway from my control of the marionettes and my swapping of locations. Since Amon allowed a bizarro sorcerer to flee, he must have made preparations to be exposed. He might even be hoping to attract the target he is looking for. I was using Gehrman Sparrow's face, but that doesn't imply anything. A faceless appearance is the least of one's concern. Then how would Amon determine my identity? A powerhouse that lurks in the dark and a demigod of the seer pathway. As the Church of Evernight and the Secret Order are in control of the formulas, ingredients, and a mermaid, there are almost no unaffiliated bizarro sorcerers. The descendants of the Antigonus family have all been wiped out. Therefore, a bizarro sorcerer is either from the Secret Order or a secret proxy that the Church of Evernight secretly nurtures. Together with me being in Backlund, the answer is almost obvious. Due to these reasons, Amon wouldn't find it difficult to determine that the Church of Evernight is aware of his whereabouts and will begin an operation to wipe him out. My reporting of him will be within expectations. Not doing so would be abnormal. Yes, he will definitely be hiding. Even if he replaces the identity of that Marauder Pathway demigod, he wouldn't come to Backlund Street anytime soon. Having made this judgment, Klein immediately felt a little more relieved because it meant that he would have plenty of time to prepare. What ideas do you have? Seeing Klein's prolonged silence after he finished his description, Leonard couldn't help but ask. Klein reined in his thoughts and asked without answering him. What suggestions does Palaz Zoroast have regarding this? He said that if you wish to deal with Amon's avatar in Backland, you have to first obtain the blessings of concealment, Leonard replied truthfully. Blessings of concealment. Palaz Zoroast is openly trying to test me. Half the symbol behind the fool's seat represents concealment. Using paper angels and the red priest card, I can stir the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog, making it possible for me to disrupt Amon's avatar. However, it's probably unable to prevent him from prying into fate itself. However, I still have another identity as Evernight's Blessed, and another title of the goddess is the Mother of Concealment. Is eliminating Amon's avatar considered paying the price or receiving a bestowment? Seems like both. Klein thought before replying in a deep voice. Tell Palaz Zoroast that I'm a Blessed of Concealment. I will attempt to pray for help. He was referring to being the Blessed of the Mother of Concealment, but it was certain that Palaz Zoroast would understand it as being the Fool's Blessed. Chapter 986 The Infectiousness of Parasitizing. So Mr. Fool also has authority in the aspect of concealment. Leonard came to a realization as he understood why Old Man had specially mentioned the need for the blessings of concealment. Without waiting for his reply, Klein added, in addition, tell Palaz Zoroast that Amon might very well know that there's a marauder pathway angel in the vicinity of Baklund Street. This. Leonard's pupils dilated as he blurted out. How would he know that? It's not convenient to tell you why. Klein mumbled inwardly before replying rather sternly. It's not like I'm Amon. Which of his actions or words made you come to this conclusion? Leonard asked subconsciously. No, it's me who told him. Klein chuckled as a response. Indeed. Leonard nodded and said, no problem. I'll inform Old Man of this. He paused for a moment before asking, are you waiting for him to give a detailed plan? Klein tersely acknowledged. When it comes to the knowledge of Amon and the marauder pathway, few are better than him. Having said that, Klein, who had determined that Amon wouldn't come to Baklund Street anytime soon, calmly added, there's no need to be in a rush to respond. Give me the feedback at tomorrow's tarot gathering. From the looks of it, things haven't reached a critical stage yet. Leonard figured out the most important information from Klein's words. He nodded slightly and said, all right, we will discuss this in detail at tomorrow's tarot gathering. After settling this matter, Klein immediately got up and bowed in the direction of the door of light. Mr. Fool, we are done. Leonard stood up, but before he could do anything, his vision became a blur as the crimson stellar light inundated him. When he snapped awake, he found himself in the sparse forest on the outskirts of Northborough. Is there anything you wish to tell me? Palaz Zoroast's slightly aged voice sounded. Leonard cleared his throat and said, Klein told me that he's a Blessed of Concealment. He can attempt to pray for help. Blessed of Concealment. Indeed, Palaz sighed and said, tell him that as long as he can really gain the blessings of concealment, I'm willing to provide help when it comes to dealing with Amon and finding all his avatars hiding in Backland. Leonard wasn't surprised by this answer as he chuckled. Old man, you don't sound as weak as you make yourself out to be. Palaz Zoroast chuckled without a hint of anger in his tone. Didn't you read through Roselle's quotes? I recall that there's a saying that a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. That will depend on the breed of horse and camel, Leonard retorted habitually before asking. Old man, how should we deal with Amon? Do you plan on using yourself as bait? Ahem. Palaz snapped back, if that were the case, what we'll be facing will be Amon's actual body and not his avatars. When that happens, there's a high chance that it will instigate a deity's battle. I might still have a chance of escaping. As for you, perhaps you will return to Evernight's tenebrous heaven. Leonard could only reply with a chortle. Palaz Zoroast continued, unlike the similar powers of other pathways, Amon's avatars can rapidly strengthen himself by absorbing the beyonder characteristics of the marauder pathway, thereby splitting even more worms of time, allowing him to parasitize different creatures. As long as there's enough beyonder characteristics, this process can keep happening. Isn't this like the spread of a plague? Leonard felt a chill run down his back once again. If one had enough beyonder characteristics of the marauder pathway, Amon's avatars could go from parasitizing one person to the entire city. Pretty much. Palaz Zoroast affirmed Leonard's guess and sighed. To deal with Amon, this is the only way to take action. Using marauder pathway beyonder characteristics at the demigod level to bait him out. As long as you successfully finish off one of his avatars, There are ways to seek out and eliminate the rest. However, Amon is a master of deceit. We need to be careful. Otherwise it might appear like we are baiting him, but in actual fact, he is baiting you. On this matter, concealment is of utmost importance. I understand. Leonard sighed and turned to ask, how strong can Amon's avatar be? Palaz Zoroast fell silent for a few seconds as though in recollection. Finally he said, in theory, his strongest avatar can reach the equivalent of a sequence 1, but it's almost impossible for him to do so. This will make his mental state unstable and show signs of losing control. Typically, one of his avatars is a worm of time, each starting off as a weak sequence 4. However, each possesses the trait of an angel capable of shattering Beyonder characteristics. By absorbing sufficient amounts of Marauder Pathway Beyonder characteristics, such an avatar can reach a level equivalent to a sequence 2. However, Amon seldom does so. His avatars will automatically fracture and create even more avatars. Furthermore, with the actual situation in Backland, it's very difficult for him to gather enough Beyonder characteristics that can raise his avatar to sequence 2. Leonard thought carefully for a moment before asking, so, we will be facing a group of almonds. Amongst them, a majority have the strength of a weak sequence 4, with a minority having the normal standards of a sequence 4, while an extremely small minority reaches sequence 3. With Amon's style, it's likely the case. However, you have to remember that Amon is good at deceit, Palaz Zoroast warned. In addition, based on the time since Amon's avatar arrived in Backland, the number of Marauder Pathway Beyonder characteristics he has gathered to date can't be too much. After all, this is Backland. Also, if the situation isn't right, his avatars will use the strongest one as the center and automatically gather together to achieve an elevation in strength. The most important matter when dealing with Amon is to not let matters develop to this stage. Otherwise, there's no stopping Amon from escaping, even if an angel of the concealment domain arrives. It's truly difficult to deal with him. Besides, it's just an avatar he randomly threw out to develop themselves. As expected of a king of angels, after Leonard made a poignant sigh, he suddenly recalled Klein's reminder and hurriedly said, the Angel of Time has apparently already locked onto a Marauder Pathway demigod. Klein said that he encountered Amon while pursuing the demigod. Also, Amon seems to know that there might be a Marauder Pathway angel hidden in the region around Baklund Street. Palaz Zoroast fell silent once again, remaining that way for a pretty long period of time. After a while, with Leonard unable to stop himself from prodding for a response, he lamented with a sigh. Why is your former colleague as troublesome as you? What? Leonard wore a blank look. Pal Zoroast said in a peeved manner, the reason why Amon knows that there's a Marauder Pathway angel around Baklund Street is likely due to him. Old man, why you have the ability to decrypt? Leonard asked in puzzlement. Palaz harumphed. I was using my brain. Otherwise, why do you think there's the prefix of Baklund Street? That's true. Anything that has to do with Baklund Street can't avoid Dwayne Dante's. Could it be some problem that fellow Klein created? Only then did Leonard come to a realization. At this moment, Palaz sighed. Thankfully, he only said an angel and not my name. Otherwise, I suggest that we immediately leave Backland. Tell him that there are currently 2 solutions. First, it's to seek out a Grade 1 sealed artifact of the Marauder Pathway or find a demigod of the Marauder Pathway. Using them we design a trap. This entire process requires the blessings of concealment. Furthermore, it needs to be natural, reasonable, normal, and in no way incur suspicion. Second, wait for Amon to enter Baklund Street. He might do a combination of replacing someone's identity and infiltrating through the air. Therefore, your former colleague needs to see through the grafting of fate or notice the abnormalities in the microbes. Otherwise, no matter what plans are employed, it will simply be feeding Amon. Leonard's eyelid twitched when he heard that as he solemnly nodded. I'll discuss these matters with him tomorrow afternoon. All right. Palaz Zoroast sighed and said, also, if all the Amon avatars in Backland can be eliminated, most of the worms of time left behind will belong to me, as a form of replenishing himself. It's no wonder old man is willing to take the risk. Leonard asked in enlightenment, do those worms of time have the Beyonder characteristics of the Marauder Pathway? It might be the case in my hands, but not necessarily for others, Palaz explained simply. The worms of time left when Amon's avatars die will indeed contain a sufficient amount of Beyonder characteristics in the beginning, but they will quickly deplete and return to the main body. The corresponding power is needed to prevent this phenomenon from happening. Leonard first nodded before asking in confusion. Why was the luck siphon charms made from the worms of time so powerful? Pallas instantly scoffed. Have you forgotten what the essence of the charm is? Its essence is the power obtained from a high-level existence. It then uses a material that can handle this power, as well as the powers obtained from the corresponding symbols, to stabilize it. The worm of time's role is to be a unique vessel. If the level is high enough, its essence is compatible, and there is sufficient spirituality, the requirements will be met. Therefore, the power of the luck siphon charm actually comes from Mr. Fool? Leonard asked in thought. Pallas Zoros chuckled and said, yes, you can try praying to Amon as well and use his power to create luck siphon charms. Of course, the uniqueness of the vessel material will also affect the effects of the final product. In other words, different special materials will lead to different characteristics in power based on the response. Sigh. Charms are a very profound and complicated piece of knowledge. It's not something that can be completely grasped by having some cursory education. You have to put more effort into it. Leonard immediately felt somewhat ashamed. On Monday afternoon, using the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog to check on Hazel's family to confirm that there weren't any problems in the meantime, Klein patiently waited for the convening of the tarot gathering. Dark red beams shot up in the ancient palace before gradually calming down. Without a pause, Audrey got up and bowed towards the end of the long mottled table. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Chapter 987, Warehouse Clearance. After the greetings, everyone took their seats. Audrey swept her gaze across the third card of blasphemy placed beside Mr. Fool's right hand. She suddenly came to a realization that she had forgotten to obtain Roselle's diary entries from the psychology alchemists this week. I've been caught up with the problem with Vin Rambis all week. Audrey, who felt that she had already brightened up, instantly felt a little melancholic. At this moment, Katlia had looked towards the seat of honor at the end of the long mottled table. She bowed her head and said, Honorable Mr. Fool, I haven't received any Roselle diary entries this week as well. Queen Mystic hasn't provided any of the Emperor's diary entries for 2 consecutive weeks. Did something happen? Leisurely sitting in his high-backed chair, the Fool Klein felt somewhat puzzled as he couldn't help but have pessimistic thoughts. However, he swiftly denied this possibility because Ma'am Hermit didn't show any anxiety or concern. With the way Admiral of Stars presents herself as a fledgling in need of her mother in the dream world in the ruins of the Battle of God, she definitely wouldn't be this calm if Queen Mystic doesn't reply to her for 2 consecutive weeks. Her anxiety might even prompt her to seek the Fool's help. That also means that she has received a reply from Bernadette in the past 2 weeks, but none of Roselle's diary entries were provided. Klein nodded gently and replied Katlia calmly, No hurry. After saying that, his thoughts raced as he began analyzing the reason for Bernadette's actions. First, Klein eliminated the possibility that she no longer had any more Roselle diary entries. Combining the frequency at which the Emperor wrote diary entries, he surmised that the compiled diary would exceed 10 standard books. Even if Bernadette only had a third of that, she was definitely capable of producing 1 or 2 books. In addition, the diary entries she had previously provided were just a tiny minority which touched on crucial intelligence. Second, Klein didn't believe that Queen Mystic had gained the entire truth from the answers he had given. Finally, he was also certain that she couldn't decipher the simplified Chinese she had in hand from the tidbits of feedback she received. After all, he didn't give a detailed translation, but vague answers comprising of a few words. Combining all 3 points, he suspected if the diary entries Bernadette planned on providing next would be even more important. They were more key and pointed to a certain secret or extremely special questions that made one unsure if they wanted to know the answer. Thus, this Queen Mystic was presently in a dilemma. It's likely the case. I wonder what the Emperor will write about. Besides, how is Bernadette able to know the importance of the entry? I should remember to get Ma'am Hermit to pass on my requests. While in thought, Alger had already turned to look at Leonard. I apologize. There's still no news of mystical items that meet your request at the moment. That's very normal. That's right. Mystical items from sequence 5 and 6 aren't common to begin with. Leonard nodded in understanding. He was originally sitting very straight, but when he found that the moon and the magician weren't so uptight, he also relaxed, relieving the straightening of his back. Upon seeing this, Klein controlled the World Gehrman Sparrow and said with a hoarse voice, I have a mystical item that suits your requests in various aspects. It's just that it has quite a number of negative effects that make it difficult to avoid. Do you want to consider it? He was referring to the word of the sea. Klein had never had the intention of selling this item that almost required sealing to Leonard, as he felt that his dear poet friend couldn't withstand the negative effects of word of the sea. The belting of songs that didn't discriminate between ally or foe, the trait of tripping the wielder, or the flaw of being prone to lightning strikes weren't easily avoided. Klein was only able to use it by teaching the word of the sea above the grey fog a good lesson, and having Winner Enuni wield it to not be affected. He had even converted the flaws into something that could aid him. However, after considering how Leonard had a Sequence 1 Marauder Pathway angel parasitizing him, Klein had the feeling that Leonard might have the means to resolve the problem. Therefore, he ultimately made an inquiry. "Oh, tell me about it." Leonard believed that Klein wouldn't scam him, so he expressed his intentions of getting to know the exact situation. The World Gehrman Sparrow glanced at the hanged man and said slowly, "It can release lightning on a target." He roughly described the beyonder powers of the word of the sea and the negative effects, leaving Leonard somewhat enticed despite frowning. "It can actually be used as a staff to allow me to fly. Even at Sequence 5 Spirit Warlock, I'll need to seek out a suitable spirit before I can fly. Besides, the offensive strength really is formidable. There are quite a number of traits, but the 3 negative effects are quite terrifying. I'll return to ask Old Man to see if he has any means to reduce the negative effects." Leonard pondered for a few seconds before saying, "I'll take some time to consider it. How about I give you an answer next week?" "No problem," the World Gehrman Sparrow replied without any hint of surprise. As for the other members, even if they were interested in the beginning, all of them gave up the thought of inquiring about the price once they heard the negative effects that the word of the sea possessed. At this moment, the fool Klein's mind was focused on another matter. He was wondering if he should take this opportunity to do a warehouse clearance sale. He had advanced to Sequence 4, and after becoming a demigod, many of the items and characteristics he had before were no longer of much use. "I can keep creeping hunger. I should keep it just for traveling alone. In addition, it can graze 1 Sequence 4 saint. It has room for further growth. Furthermore, the combination of the various beyonder powers it has is pretty good. The value of Death Knell is no longer that great, but after activating lethal attack mode, the damage it does on a fixed target exceeds that of air cannon. At the very least, I can still use it at Sequence 4. Yes, it also has room for growth." The first 2 items that surfaced in Klein's mind were the 2 items he frequently used. From his point of view, as long as he obtained more powerful bullets, he could produce terrifying effects with Death Knell. The only problem was that such bullets were equivalent to high-level charms, nothing that could be easily found. Even if he sought out the materials to make them himself, he had to consider the chances of success when praying to some high-level existence or if it was possible for there to be a backlash. On this aspect, Klein came up with a few plans. Spray to the goddess. Request Snake of Mercury will accept and to provide help. Go through Leonard to get Pallas Zorost's help. Use the powers of the mysterious space above the grey fog and also get Leonard to make a trip back to Tingen under the guise of a mission, so as to steal some of the powers of the Eternal Blazing Sun's divine blood from 3-0782, the mutated sun's sacred emblem. Flaring sun bullets are definitely the nemesis of creatures like evil spirits. I have some idea on how to use the materials via borrowing the power of the mysterious space above the grey fog. Amon's Worms of Time can be used to make luck siphon charms. My Worms of Spirit can also be made into beyonder bullets. As for how it can be done, I'll need to ask Pallas Zorost. Klein began anticipating the upcoming chat with Leonard. Worm of Spirit was the name he gave to those transparent maggots. Following that, he began considering the other items and characteristics. Sun Brooch? I currently lack such powers and items. Although I can use the control over spirit body threads to deal with evil spirits, I can keep it and allow my paper angel to have 1 more additional change. Besides, I can also lend it to Danitz from time to time. Flower of Blood? I can't sell it. The Tarot Club doesn't have any Aurora Order members. I'll continue letting my marionette use it. Having 1 additional life is 1 additional hope. Green Essence? I can sell this. I can transfer my ailments already. Creeping Hunger also has a Dr. Grazed. Murloc Cufflink? There's no need for this either. If I have a sudden need for its powers, I can transform into a huge fish. And in the long term, I can just head above the grey fog to use Sea God Scepter to augment myself with the effects. Broken Finger? I wonder if anyone would want it. Besides, I haven't fully investigated why the rat demigod was sealed. It might be of use. I have 1 purifying bullet, 6 demon hunting bullets, and 2 exorcism bullets left. I'll just randomly use them. There's no need for me to sell them. Biological poison bottle? Sigh, I haven't been able to sell it all this time. Blatherer's aura? This can be used to make charms or bullets. I'll temporarily not sell it. But herein lies the problem. Am I to pray to the dark side of the universe? That can be struck off the list of options. I'll see if there are any replacement plans in the future. An interrogator beyonder characteristic, a lunatic beyonder characteristic, 15 milliliters of 1,000-faced hunter's blood, 40 grams of spirit world plunderer powder, an eyeball of a 6-winged gargoyle. Tarot club members have no need for these. I might be able to reward the believers of Sea God or the resistance in Rorsted Archipelago. As these thoughts flashed across his mind, Klein quickly made a decision. As for items which were at least at the demigod level such as the Sea God's scepter, Grozel's travels, the Giant King's court key, he didn't consider selling them. Then, he made the World Gehrman's sparrow say, I have 2 mystical items for sale. Their levels are relatively low. Katlia immediately replied, a low level doesn't mean it's useless. Many low sequence Beyonders powers can even turn the tides of battles involving sequence 5 Beyonders. I'm rather interested in knowing the detailed situation of those 2 mystical items. Klein nodded gently and described the uses and flaws of Murloc Cufflink and Green Essence. After he was done, he said, Murloc Cufflink for £500, Green Essence for £1,000. Just as he said that, Audrey raised her arm. I wish to buy the Murloc Cufflink. She actually wished to say that she wanted both. After all, the 2 mystical items have extremely minor negative side effects. However, considering how others might have their needs, she found it inappropriate for her to take them all. Audrey finally decided to only take Murloc Cufflink. This could provide her a layer of illusory scales, preventing her from being easily caught. And more importantly, she didn't know how to swim. This could effectively make up for her weakness. As for the heat and the dry weather easily causing fatigue, she wasn't too worried about it. This was because, be it in Eastchester County or Backland, the temperature seldom exceeded 300 C. The humidity was also rather high. Seeing Miss Justice having her eyes on Murloc Cufflink, the other members wisely gave up without raising the price, allowing the trade to quickly come to an end. Following that, Alger bought the Green Essence ring. To him, although the water domain had certain restorative spells, they were inferior to a dedicated item. As a Beyonder who often had to engage in melee battles, it was of great importance. As for attracting mosquitoes, Alger wasn't bothered. This was because he had illusory scales beneath his skin, preventing him from being afraid of bites. After the transaction segment came to an end, Emlyn cleared his throat and asked a question. Chapter 988 Joint Operation. Emlyn couldn't help but clasp his hands together, lift up his chin, and say to Miss Magician diagonally opposite him, I've already confirmed that the ancient abandoned castle in Delaire Forest is an internal test that the Sanguine had given me, having hidden the key situation. With that said, he felt as though a weight had been lifted off his chest. He no longer felt as hesitant, embarrassed due to the difficult situation he was in. He surveyed the area and looked for Ma'am Hermit's and Mr. Hanged Man's reaction. He realized that they appeared to have expected it, showing no signs of surprise. From the looks of it, they had already an idea when Miss Magician mentioned the problem with the intel. Emlyn nodded his head in secret and added before Miss Magician replied, I'm very sorry. I will refund you the £300 for the intel fee. In addition, I'll pay you another £300. Also, I will punish the Sanguine who deliberately omitted information. Although Mr. Moon always wears a proud demeanor, he's rather sincere when a mistake has been made. He didn't find an excuse to push the blame onto. However, I've already obtained the Ancient Wraith's cursed item and remnant spirituality, so the matter is already over. He didn't deliberately wish to cause harm to me and Zio. There's no need for me to get so much compensation. Furs remembered Zio's exhortations. Without looking at her, she said, It's only a matter of oversight. There's no need for compensation. Just refunding me for the intel fee is sufficient. Just as she said that, she suddenly thought of something. Since the ancient abandoned castle was a test of the Sanguine, didn't that mean that Zio and herself had been targeted by the Sanguine? Furs finally couldn't hold back as she turned to glance at Zio. She found Miss Judgment shaking her head slightly, indicating that she hadn't discovered anyone monitoring them. Furs felt puzzled and found it inexplicable. She then allowed her thoughts to wander as she recalled the situation back then. We did the exploration only after quite a while. The Sanguine had already lost their patience by then? The boss of the Towns Inn knew of the ancient abandoned castle. He was a Sanguine in disguise? That's not right. Many of the locals knew of this matter. However, that place was too far away and there wasn't anything of value left inside. That's why, unless one was out hunting, people usually wouldn't head in that direction. That's not right. If the ancient abandoned castle were that dangerous, why are the people who use it for shelter from the rain completely fine? They only describe it as creepy and a little scary? Yes, the Sanguine would usually seal off the passage that heads underground. They opened it for the test? This means that there was some form of monitoring. Because the ancient castle is too dangerous, the monitoring was done outside the forest and not inside. As Zio and I got lost, we circled around the monitors and weren't detected? Mr. Fool didn't mention anything about it. It's probably not a huge problem. More attention needs to be taken when I return. As Furz's thoughts raced, Emlyn said after some pondering. Okay. He didn't insist on additional compensation, because he believed that the best form of compensation was to punish Ern's boyar instead of giving money. Then, he waited for Miss Magician to ask about the punishment, hoping that he could take the opportunity to make an inquiry to the other Tarot Club members. He wanted to see if he could get any good suggestions. As for Furs, upon considering that it was an internal matter for the Sanguine and that although she was a victim, Mr. Moon hadn't offered a plan for action, she decided not to press further in consideration for his feelings. Instead, she decided to wait for the conclusion to see if it was satisfactory. The palace that looked like a giant's residence turned silent as the mood turned odd. Audrey looked opposite her and glanced to the side. Pursing her lips, she curiously asked, "Mr. Moon, how do you plan on punishing that Sanguine?" Phew. Emlyn silently exhaled as he subconsciously looked at the world. He did so because of orders from the higher-ups. I believe that this mistake isn't something that deserves payment with his life. In between the lines, Emlyn was implying that Mr. World didn't need to intervene in this matter. There was no need to escalate the matter. Seeing the world having no objections, Emlyn cast his gaze forward. I plan on leading that Sanguine to a particular cathedral of the Church of Earth Mother in Backland. Having participated in so many tarot gatherings, even if he couldn't be concerned about certain details, he knew the requirement of hiding matters regarding himself in the real world. Therefore, he didn't mention the Harvest Church. The Church of Earth Mother only has one cathedral in all of Backland. That's the Harvest Church. The rest are all in the outskirts and surroundings villages. Leonard held back his laughter as he looked up at the dome above. You wish to have the Beyonders of the Church of Earth Mother purify that Sanguine? Furs blurted out in surprise. From her point of view, this was no different from directly killing the person in question. Emlyn was momentarily at a loss for words. At that moment, Catlia interrupted. The Church of Earth Mother has the habit of inducting the Sanguine into the church, converting their faith and making them priests or bishops. I see. With thoughts in mind, Audrey glanced at Mr. Moon without letting him notice it. Getting that Sanguine to become a member of the clergyman, to pray daily at the cathedral and do voluntary work, so as to cleanse the heart. He would be stuck doing this for a very long period of time. Mr. Moon's plan for punishment is really vicious. However, I like it. That fellow nearly made me and Zio turn into ancient wraiths due to the corruptive powers behind the door. Furs instantly felt her interest piqued as she asked, Mr. Moon, how do you plan on luring the Sanguine into the Cathedral of Earth Mother? Have you worked out a plan? Perhaps I can provide some help. You have to be careful. You mustn't enter the Cathedral of Earth Mother in order to punish him. Teach that way, the only thing you can do is to request Mr. Fool for help. Of course, that might be something Mr. Fool wishes to happen, allowing him to have someone on the inside of the Church of Earth Mother. After saying that, Furs silently added. Upon hearing that, Leonard nearly laughed out. He was extremely certain that Mr. Moon was the Harvest Church's Emlyn White. Clearly, this Sanguine was already a priest of Earth Mother. This is slightly akin to a drowning person pulling others in. Leonard held back his laughter, glanced at the world, and he found that his former colleague didn't seem perturbed. He appeared extremely somber. He couldn't help but think, is this the power of a clown, or is it a state that Klein is accustomed to? At the end of the long mottled table, the fool Klein nearly covered his mouth. He never expected Emlyn to be so creative. This was a little like multi-level marketing. Yet it's a little different. After all, It's not necessarily a good thing for Emlyn to know of that. Klein leaned back into his chair as he awaited the development with piqued interest. He had always kept in mind Miss Justice's advice during his last treatment session about not always wearing a thick mask. He tried his best to do so when opportunities arose so as to maintain a healthy mental state. Upon hearing Miss Magician's words of concern, Emlyn felt even more awkward because he went to the Cathedral of Earth Mother several times a day on a daily basis. He felt uncomfortable even if he skipped the weekends. He cleared his throat and said, "I temporarily do not have a thought-out plan. I wish to get some suggestions from all of you. Yes, I hope that we do not have too intense a battle. It's difficult to ensure that the matter doesn't escalate, and I also do not wish for my identity to be directly exposed. Miss Magician, there are no problems regarding your participation, but we will absolutely not be meeting each other." His idea of not directly exposing his identity meant that he didn't mind that Ernst Boyar and the other Sanguine could guess that he did it. It was a way to instill shock and awe in them, but it was best that there wasn't any obvious evidence. Furs tersely answered as she mimicked the other experienced members of the Tarot Club. "First, you need to tell us what sequence that Sanguine is roughly at and what he's good at." Emlyn was already prepared as he answered. "It's equivalent to sequence 5. He's quite experienced and is good at creating the effects of the full moon." Effects of the full moon. Furs was taken aback as she turned agape but was unable to say a word. After Emlyn finished the introduction, Furs said with a hollow chuckle, "I recall that I have other matters to tend to. It might not be convenient for me to participate in this matter." When in a state similar to the full moon, she would hear Mr. Door's ravings. And this meant that she would instantly be heavily injured by the target, losing all her combat strength. Emlyn frowned slightly, displeased with Miss Magician's sudden change in attitude. At this moment, Zio, who had been listening silently, said, "I can participate. I just need a portion of the spoils." Miss Judgment's tone is very firm. It's like she wants to exact vengeance. Emlyn mumbled silently to himself and glanced at Ma'am Hermit and Mr. Hanged Man, only to discover that they temporarily had no intention of speaking. It appeared as though they wished to observe what kind of plan the Backlund members of the Tarot Club could come up with. As this involved her friends and how it could be the first mission that the Tarot Club members would participate in at the same time, Audrey was rather intrigued. "After some observation," she said in deliberation, "I can hypnotize that Sanguine, allowing him to enter the Cathedral of Earth Mother himself. However, to not expose ourselves and to ensure a high chance of success, it's best that he's in a lost or half-dazed state while I hypnotize him." "Mr. Moon, can you do that?" Emlyn was summarizing his powers and items to consider a solution when Leonard suddenly laughed. "That's simple, but I'll only be responsible for making that Sanguine unconscious. Of course, the premise is that there's sufficient intel, and it depends on how we go about taking action." Just as he said that, Zio nodded and said, "I'm good at tracking and investigation. You can leave intel matters to me." "All right. First, Mr. Moon will have to inform me of that Sanguine's name, address, and appearance." "All right." Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief before saying in a somewhat lost manner, "Then what's my part in all of this? Also, what kind of payment do you want?" Chapter 989 Mentor Alger. Upon hearing the Moon's question, the rest of the Tarot Club members realized that the main instigator for the punishment had ended up with nothing to do. According to the established plan, all he needed to do was provide the name, address, and appearance before waiting for the outcome. Miss Judgment was in charge of tracking and investigations to figure out the target's patterns. Miss Justice and Mr. Star would then choose a suitable location based on the feedback before Mr. Star threw the Sanguine into an unconscious state without attracting any attention. Miss Justice would then take this opportunity to complete a hypnotism act and make the target proceed to the predetermined location. In this entire process, there was nothing for the Moon. Audrey deliberated and said, "Mr. Moon, what you need to do is to ensure that the hypnotized Sanguine doesn't encounter any accidents on the way to the cathedral, without him struggling or being rescued." Upon saying that, Audrey suddenly realized a problem in the plan as she hurriedly added, "If that Sanguine is extremely resistant towards the Church of Mother Earth, the hypnotic effects wouldn't be as effective. Therefore, I plan on avoiding this point if possible. I will imbue in him the thought of nabbing some target he hates, so that he wouldn't realize that he's entering the intended cathedral during the pursuit. How about letting you be the target of his hatred? This will require you to be able to ensure your own safety while maintaining a distance without being caught." "It's not a problem," Emlyn answered after some thought, with Duke Ulmer removing the mental corruption of the Sequence 5 artificial vampire beyond her characteristic. Emlyn just needed to wait till a full moon to become a viscount. That would place him equal to Ernst Boyar. And this opportunity was available next week. When that happened, he didn't believe that he would be caught up to buy a viscount just like him when he was equipped with the Ancestor's Ring. If it really won't work, I can borrow Miss Magician's spellbook. I recall that there are powers in the wind domain. Emlyn was rather confident. By the side, Leonard felt a baffling sense of horror when he heard the conversation between Miss Justice and Mr. Moon. To him, no matter how terrifying a head-on battle was, it was nothing compared to the horror of doing something that went against his own will without him realizing it. He paused for a moment and replied to the second problem that Emlyn had raised. My payment is the same as misjudgment. I want a portion of the spoils. To Leonard, this entire matter required him to determine the time and location to pull the target into a dream before he left. He didn't need to care if the operation was successful or if any accidents cropped up. It was as simple as heading to a coffee shop to order a cup of Desi coffee. The only thing that needed him to take into account was to not expose himself. Therefore, he couldn't bring himself to ask for an advanced payment, planning to obtain a cut from the final spoils of war. In addition, he believed that this was a necessary thing to do in order to fully blend in with the Tarot Club. He didn't need to nitpick on such matters. Audrey turned her head and glanced at Zio before retracting her gaze. Revealing a smile, she said, My request is the same as Mr. Star and Miss Judgment. I'll take a quarter of the spoils of war. In fact, she wasn't insistent on getting payment, because she believed that the Sanguine had bullied a Tarot Club member and her two friends. Punishing him was something she expected of herself. The reason why she took a portion of the spoils of war was to take into account Mr. Moon's feelings. She was afraid that her voluntary help would leave the prideful Sanguine embarrassed and angry. Furthermore, Mr. Moon doesn't have any money, so the payment can only be the spoils of war. Audrey added silently. Although she didn't deliberately keep count, based on her ability to take note of details and the memory of a spectator, she believed that Mr. Moon, who had spent £5,000 to purchase the Sequence 5 artificial vampire Beyonder characteristic, wasn't in the best financial state. Furthermore, he had to refund the intel fee that he earned. For participants, with each obtaining a piece of the spoils of war. That's very fair. Emlyn nodded and surveyed the area. Any other suggestions? Furs asked in disbelief. It's that simple? That's a Sanguine equivalent to a Sequence 5. The plan you came up with sounds like it would succeed very easily. In her mind, Sequence 5 Beyonders were the strongest among unaffiliated Beyonders. Some were even the host of gatherings. Even the powerful pirate admirals were of that sequence. But now, in the conversation of the Star and the others, such a Sequence 5 was to be finished so simply. There didn't seem to be any difficulties. Upon hearing her question, Leonard thought and said, As long as that Sanguine doesn't have any items that resist my powers, even if he's equivalent to a Sequence 5, I'll definitely be able to throw him into an unconscious state for some time. It will just depend on Miss Justice to grasp this opportunity. If I arrange the location and make preparations ahead of time, I'll be fine, Audrey replied in a confirmatory tone. She was actually a little uneasy. After all, this was her first time in battle, but her confidence over her Beyonder powers and knowledge in psychological mysticism allowed her to say those words with confidence. After Furs heard the response, she suddenly felt her mind a little adrift. Without realizing it, apart from Mr. World, the rest of the Tarot Club members have the ability to finish off Sequence 5 Beyonders as well. That's right. Miss Justice is already a Sequence 6 hypnotist. With the cooperation of a Beyonder of the same level, there really is a relatively high chance of hypnotizing a Sequence 5 Beyonder. Just as Emlyn felt that this matter had been settled without needing any more questions to be raised, Alger, who had been observing from the side, spoke. As members of a secret organization, I believe that everything needs to be considered at a deeper level. Emlyn and Leonard cast their gaze at Mr. Hanged Man with a puzzled look. Audrey and Zio were taken aback before they realized something. Alger cleared his throat and looked at Derek. Since Delaire Forest's abandoned ancient castle was a test, why isn't the obvious Sanguine a test as well? Exactly. I knew that Mr. Hanged Man would have given a warning. The fool Klein controlled the world Gehrman's sparrow to nod. Katlia then looked at the Hanged Man with a look of approval and agreement. This. Emlyn's pupils constricted, at a loss for a retort. In an instant, he found himself too careless. Leonard was taken aback. Immediately, he realized that he was too desultory. He had involved himself without fully understanding the details and without consideration of any latent risks. Of course, This style had to do with his identity as an official Beyonder and its thought processes. As expected of Mr. Hanged Man. He considers all the details with such meticulousness. Audrey, you need to build up more experience. Audrey focused on something else as she asked. So we need to abandon the punishment and take action when the Sanguine are unable to maintain the secret surveillance? Alger chuckled and said, there's no need to. Just a few acts of misdirection would do. He then looked at Emlyn and said, first, hand the investigation of the Sanguine to bounty hunters in Backland. Use their existence to hide misjudgment's actions. Second, when determining the location, try to do it near an Orthodox deity's cathedral. This will effectively disrupt any subsequent divinations. Third, before Miss Justice and the others take action, you have to do something that leaves one suspicious but is nothing eye-catching. Make it seem like you will be exacting revenge somewhere else so as to attract the eyeballs of the secret monitor away, thus creating the desired opportunity. This is combined with the first point. Fourth, only after the Sanguine is successfully hypnotized do you become the bait. Having said that, Alger paused. If there's the addition of anti-divination and anti-prophecy at the demigod level, this entire matter will be flawless. Of course, Miss Justice, Mr. Star, you must be disguised during the operation, without leaving behind any traces. This speech left most of the members taken aback, especially Derek. He couldn't help show his respect and amazement. Although he had no means of participating in this punishment operation, as a member of the Tarot Club, he couldn't help but be concerned and pensive about such matters that required a clear line of thought. He hadn't noticed any problems with the original plan of Mr. Moon and company, so now, he couldn't help but be impressed by Mr. Hanged Man's ability in such matters. Emlyn thought and said, you mean that I should use a superficial form of punishment to hide Miss Justice's and Mr. Star's secret operation? It's like I would make it appear that I'll take action in a particular corner of a square after the target leaves a coffee shop, attracting all the attention, but in actual fact, Miss Justice and company would have already completed the hypnosis inside the coffee shop without anyone realizing it? Alger nodded gently. That's right. I learned something new. Mr. Hanged Man really is an experienced Beyonder. Audrey felt overjoyed receiving an epiphany. The problem now is where are we to find an item or charm with anti-divination and anti-prophecy effects at the demigod level? Leonard also felt that he had enriched himself greatly as he asked. He wasn't too worried about himself since he had an angel grandpa in him. Furs made an utterance before saying, I can lend out Lamino's travels. On it there's angel's embrace. I can also take one portion of the spoils of war. As she said that, she secretly glanced at the world Gairman Sparrow, heaving a sigh of relief when he saw the gentleman silent. Unbeknownst to her, the fool Klein had a very simple thought. Angel's embrace. That sounds so much better than paper angel. With the punishment operation finally confirmed, Audrey didn't hesitate as she surveyed the area. I met the psychology alchemist's counselor, Vin Rambus, last week. What? Vin Rambus is a counselor of the psychology alchemists? Leonard sat up in surprise. He had the urge to immediately report it to the Archbishop and gather a team to arrest him. It was an occupation hazard. Chapter 990 interferes almost instinctively. Leonard looked around the table and realized that none of the other Tarot Club members showed any hint of surprise. Instead, they were listening attentively. They knew of it long ago? That's right. This is only my second gathering. I haven't had the chance to learn about many things. The secrets that get exchanged here sure are plentiful. Leonard retracted his gaze and returned to his original sitting posture. After a slight pause, Audrey glanced at Zio, who sat 2 seats away from her, before casting her gaze at Mr. Hanged Man. She continued, he attempted to cue me to interact with different nobles and understand their true attitude over different matters. I would then inform him of them. Thankfully, Mr. Fool had provided me with the blessings of an angel. So I wasn't influenced in any way. What should I do next? You can even get blessings from an angel? Leonard looked around in surprise once more, only to see no reaction from the other members of the Tarot Club. Obviously, he wasn't surprised that Mr. Fool had a few angels in existence under him. After all, the name and title corresponding to Death Consul was one that he had heard numerous times. He was just surprised that the Tarot Club members were able to pray for assistance at that level. He viewed this secret organization in a new light, finding it more impressive. Meanwhile, Zio keenly caught on to a few keywords. Noble. Psychology alchemists. Combining it with the blonde hair, emerald green eyes of Miss Justice's blurry figure, she began to connect it to a particular friend, Audrey Hall. However, she couldn't be sure because blonde hair, blue eyes, and green eyes were common among the lone nobles. People just had different combinations. Besides, no one knew how many members the psychology alchemists had developed in the noble circles. Therefore, Zio couldn't directly point it at Miss Audrey from the traits she noticed. As she tried to do a deeper level of observation, Alger had said, "There's no need to pay too much attention to this. The various Orthodox churches will provide protective measures to their believers with a rather important status. They will prevent them from being assassinated or hypnotized. This comes from experience that has been built up over 1,000 years of history. It wouldn't be that easily overcome." From another angle, if the psychology alchemists really can control the nobles that simply by hypnotizing them, the ones ruling the country wouldn't be the royal family and the three churches. Clearly, reality is in conflict with that. Yes, just as you said, Vin Rambis only gave you a cue to observe the true attitudes of the different nobles on different matters. This means that he's holding himself back greatly, afraid of doing anything too overboard. It's to prevent himself from leaving behind any clues. In addition, your true status among the nobles should just be in the periphery. You have no way of directly involving yourself in various political matters. Therefore, in contrast, the protection and monitoring over you wouldn't be too strict. This is also why Vin Rambis targeted you. Mr. Hanged Man's analysis is really detailed. Although he often taught Little Sun and the others, he would secretly gain something during the process, wishing that he could get more useful information from the feedback. However, there's none of that this time. It's the same for the suggestions for the punishment operation from before as well. On careful thought, his change has been happening for quite some time. It just wasn't too obvious in the past. I even missed out on it. Audrey's professionalism stirred up as she quickly did a mental analysis of the Hanged Man. She quickly had a theory, suspecting that Mr. Hanged Man was trying to transform his standing within the Tarot Club. Ever since Ma'am Hermit joined the Tarot Club and showcased her resources and channels at sea, Mr. Hanged Man has been unknowingly searching to transform himself in a bid to distinguish himself from her. Before problems cropped up with the artisan, this transformation wasn't that obvious. Even Mr. Hanged Man didn't realize it himself. It was only recently that he seemed to finally come to a realization and thought it to be true. Indeed, to maintain one's standing in the Tarot Club, the raising of one's strength is one aspect, but providing help to the entire group is another aspect. Audrey's mind raced as she turned her attention back to the topic at hand. She pondered for a moment and subconsciously, her tone turned heavy. Does this also mean that the Orthodox churches will have certain levels of surveillance, control, and guidance for the important nobles? This was something that she had thought about while in the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation's office. She had subconsciously drawn a scene that represented her concerns on this matter. In psychology, elements she drew out in such a state often didn't point to something particular. It was more like an abstract expression. The cold eyes mostly represented her fear for people monitoring and controlling her and her family. Combining it with her subconscious drawing, her worry of Vin Rambis's cueing, and the celebrant of the Mass at the Church of Evernight her parents attended being Baklan's archbishop, Audrey's interpretation was that not only was she afraid of the hypnosis and cues of the psychology alchemists, but she had also become fearful of the Orthodox churches. She couldn't be sure if they would directly use their beyonder powers to imbue thoughts into aristocratic believers with high standings, so as to guide them into doing actions that violated their true will. This was sacrilegious and rebellious to Audrey, who had received an Orthodox education from a young age. Therefore she had tensed up back then, immediately burning that drawing. After hearing Miss Justice's question, Alger scoffed. Isn't that very normal? When living in human society, one has to accept a certain level of surveillance, control and guidance. I know what you're afraid of, but think about it. Compare someone using their power conferred from their standing, using money and weapons to control and guide others, to using beyonder powers to do something similar. In essence, is there any difference? The difference is that one knows that they don't wish to do it but ends up having to do it. The other is that they do not even have the thoughts of being unwilling to do it. Audrey nodded and said, yes, this means the loss of freedom of one's mind and thoughts. It's the most terrifying. Alger chuckled once more. How can there be a completely free mind and thoughts? By choosing your faith and beliefs, you're naturally bound by your faith and beliefs. Yes, let's focus only on the Lone Kingdom. The three churches are equal, and together with the royal family, this creates a balance between each other. If the Church of Storms goes overboard towards its believers, that believer can easily convert their faith to the Church of Evernight. Therefore, under most situations, the Orthodox churches will tend to use their standing and beliefs as a religion to guide important believers instead of using beyonder powers. Balance. Audrey pondered over this term. She came to a new realization of the kingdom's upper circles and the entire world. This was something she had come into contact with before, but had never deeply understood the word. At this moment, many of her thoughts matured. "Thank you for your explanation, Mr. Hanged Man." Audrey sincerely addressed him with an honorary title. "Then how should I deal with Vin Rambis?" Alger calmly said, "The problem with him isn't anything to panic about. You fully have the ability to run circles around him. You can provide him unimportant information while keeping the core secrets to heart. You can seek this opportunity to obtain potion formulas and even their beyonder ingredients. After some time, when there are corresponding changes, you can consider switching strategies. Of course, you can't be too careless. Duke Negan is an example of this mistake." Just as he said that, sitting at the bottom of the long mottled table, the World Gairman Sparrow glanced at Miss Justice. He said with a hoarse smile, "When the time comes, even if Vin Rambis were to die, no one will suspect you. Even if Vin Rambis were to die. He's a demigod. Mr. World has plans of attacking Vin Rambis? It's possible. He has always been investigating Quarren's suicide case. He was even the one who informed me of Vin Rambis's true identity." Audrey's eyes widened slightly as she felt perturbed. Even when she hated and felt the most fear towards Vin Rambis, she had never had thoughts of killing the psychology alchemist's counselor. All she considered was the means to avoid being guided. On the one hand, it was because she didn't have such thoughts, and on the other hand, it was because he was a demigod. This meant the top-ranking power in the kingdom and churches. "I understand what needs to be done. Thank you, all of you." Audrey drew a breath and politely thanked them. Klein sure sounds bombastic these days. Yes, he even wishes to get rid of Amon's avatars in Backlund. Vin Rambis is really nothing. Leonard looked at the World Gairman Sparrow with mixed feelings. Katlia and company also remained silent. With the topic of the psychology alchemists coming to an end, Klein controlled the World Gairman Sparrow to make him look towards himself. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I wish to communicate privately with Mr. Star." Klein temporarily didn't wish to let the other members of the Tarot Club learn about the eradication of Amon's avatars. It wouldn't be good for keeping the matter confidential, and it might lead them to be targeted by Amon. Sure. The fool Klein naturally didn't deny his own request. As Leonard was feeling poignant at the possibility of private communication, he informed Klein of the main points in Palaz Zorost's reply. It also included the problem of the Worm of Time beyonder characteristics loss. This made Klein suddenly realize how he could use his Worms of Spirit to create charms and bullets. Split off a few and kill them. When the characteristic contained in them return to my body, the remaining material can also be used like a Worm of Time. The only problem is that killing Worms of Spirit deals a certain level of damage to myself. After all, each Worm of Spirit contains a part of my spirit body. Yes, I have to limit the number each time. Only after I fully recover can I do it again. In thought, Klein got the World Gairman Sparrow to reply. "I will try my best to confirm if a blessing of concealment is possible before I give you an answer. If there's no problem, we can attempt to seek out sealed artifacts of the Marauder pathway at the demigod level. Of course, I will try to think of the means to identify the grafting of fate." Klein wasn't sure if observation from above the grey fog would allow him to see the truth of fate, just like how he was able to see his believers being parasitized. Hence, he planned on using the paper crane to contact Snake of Mercury Willa Septon and gain his expert opinion. All right. As Leonard grumbled about how Old Man would have recovered further if demigod-level sealed artifacts at the Marauder pathway were that easy to find, he nodded slightly in response. Chapter 991, A Ritual Without a Reply. After ending the private communication, Klein made the World Gairman Sparrow look at Katlia. "Please inform Queen Mystic that I wish to meet her to talk about something. The exact time and location is up to her." Queen Mystic? So Ma'am Hermit represents the royals above the 5 seas. Leonard was first taken aback before he came to a realization. What's the matter? Katlia frowned slightly in a wary manner. "I will forward her your intentions, but I cannot provide any guarantees over her agreement." Okay. The World Gairman Sparrow nodded simply, indicating that it was fine. At this moment, Derek finally had an opportunity as he asked, "Everyone." He glanced at Mr. Hanged Man and Mr. World before continuing. "The ritual needed for me to advance to Priest of Light requires pure darkness. I need to bury my entire body in ice that usually doesn't melt. In the City of Silver, such ice isn't difficult to find. However, how do we create pure but safe darkness? So that's the Priest of Light's advancement ritual. Little Sun sure is honest and simple." Due to her lack of experience and knowledge, Audrey was unable to provide any substantial suggestions. All she could do was cast her eyes at the person she believed was capable of resolving the problem. The World, Mr. Gehrman Sparrow. And at this moment, the World raised his hands to pinch his temples. As for the fool Klein, he was rapidly trying to think of a solution. Sigh, if this were the outside world, pure darkness is extremely easy to obtain. Ice that normally doesn't melt would be the most troublesome thing to obtain, but the City of Silver is the complete opposite. There, darkness is too dangerous. Just being within it will result in one's disappearance or suffering the attacks of strange monsters. I can get Leonard to provide charms from the Evernight domain, and then I can stir some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. Using Little Sun's prayers, I can provide an area of artificial darkness. But the problem lies in me being unable to determine if this would bring the normal danger that the City of Silver encounters. This is not something that can be answered with divination. When matters do not involve myself, I can only determine if a matter is dangerous or not, or when matters should be done. And under such situations, there are too many elements involved, and the sources of danger are diverse. Yes, I'll summon a Rhodes later and ask it. Klein had previously been considering the problem over Little Sun's advancement, but he had never been able to find an answer. Seeing the world silent, Leonard, who had originally wanted to say that creating pure darkness is extremely easy, slowly shut his mouth. He began pondering over the sun's words and caught notice of a word that he had ignored. Safe. In the forsaken land of the gods, in the City of Silver, darkness is equivalent to danger. Leonard roughly grasped the key idea, but due to his lack of understanding, he was unable to provide any suggestions. Finally, it was Alger who spoke. He glanced at Derek and said, "I will help you gather information and seek out solutions. But in the process, you might need to provide some help to confirm that it can be done." "No problem," Derek answered without any hesitation. Right on the heels of that, he added, "There's no need to rush it. I still have about a month before I can finish digesting my notary potion." Alger nodded gently, indicating that this wasn't something that needed any reminders. At this moment, Katlia deliberated for a moment and said to Derek, "Perhaps we can consider this problem from another angle. Your advancement ritual wouldn't last too long. We can simply increase the time you can survive in pure darkness to resolve this matter. I remember that you've mentioned that after being left in darkness with zero light, there are two dangers. The first would be the attacks from strange monsters that come from unknown origins, and the second would be a baffling instance of disappearance that is akin to evaporating. The former situation is easy to resolve. You can make a request to your chief for certain sealed artifacts, or you can get him to stand guard by your side. As for the second case, I don't know enough. You can attempt to ask your chief." Derek thought about it carefully and suddenly felt that this was a viable train of thought with a rather significant chance of success. He immediately replied in pleasant surprise, "Thank you, Ma'am Hermit." The exchange and learning session continued until the gathering slowly came to an end. Seeing that it was almost done, the fool Klein rapped gently on the table's corner. "Let's end it here for today. Your wish is our will." Audrey and company stood up and bowed reverently. After they vanished from above the gray fog, Klein left the area and returned to the real world. He first took out his wallet and got the paper crane which was folded by Willa Septon. Spreading it across the table, he picked up a pencil and simply wrote, "There's something." After folding the paper crane and stuffing it under his pillow, Klein got into bed and genuinely took an afternoon nap. In his hazy dream, he once again saw the pitch-black plains and the towering steeple. Passing through the plains and through the wooden doors, Klein arrived at the familiar corner. A black pram came out of the thick shadows as Willa Septon, wrapped in silver silk, sucked at his right thumb and derided angrily, "You are getting more and more impolite." Klein laughed dryly and said, "With our relationship, there's no need for such pleasantries, right?" Willa Septon harumphed and said, "Speak, what's the matter?" "This is the thing. I recently encountered Amon's avatar," Klein said directly. The baby's mouth widened a little as though he was about to cry. It took him great effort to control himself as he said, "I haven't been born for more than a month. There's nothing I need from you. I only wish to ask you a question, Klein quickly added. Will Septon raised his fleshy arm and waved it. What is it? Klein immediately said with a smile. Amon's avatar can steal the destiny of others and appear while replacing their identities. I wish to know how I can see through such a terrifying matter. Will Septon chuckled as he pointed up at the sky with his index finger. Pray for help. From the looks of it, using the powers of the gray fog can be used to discover the grafting of destiny. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he felt even more certain. When he thought of the word using, he was referring to using his marionette to pray to the fool while he entered above the gray fog. Through the point of light representing his believer, he could survey the surrounding area to seek out any abnormalities. In a sense, this was equivalent to the fool's observation, an equivalent to an augmented true vision. But the problem is that I can't stay above the gray fog to observe for grafting all the time. It might be the case that, in between two of the observation periods, Amon could have entered Buckland Street and have done something. Klein thought before asking with some deliberation. Anything you would like to remind me of? Will Septon turned his head away without looking at him as he mumbled. You have to visit me and my parents once this week. During high tea. No problem. Klein agreed without any hesitation. Only then did the baby turn his head back and giggle. Next week, around Wednesday or Thursday, there might be some changes in your destiny. Is that so? Klein nodded in thought as he watched the black pram slowly retreat into the shadows. After waking up from his dream, he packed up his items and began setting up an altar without any rest. This time, the target of his prayer was the Evernight goddess herself, and not artificial death. This was to prevent Amon from prying upon the source of the stirring via the changes in destiny and, thus, noticing something wrong. How could the Evernights blessed be praying to artificial death? After setting up the ritual, Klein wiped his face and turned into the cold-looking German sparrow, causing his height to drop a little lower. After igniting the first two candles in front, Klein made the ordinary candle representing himself burn with a yellow flame. There were two candles in front. One was a candle made of night vanilla and slumber flower to represent Evernight, and the other was a candle made up of white chestnut flowers and wild rose to represent concealment. Following that, he created a wall of spirituality, dripped full moon essential oil, and burned some herbal powder that pleased the goddess. Bit by bit, he completed the ritual. Towards the end, Klein took 2 steps back, activated his spirit vision, and chanted softly, I pray for the power of the dark night. I pray for the power of the mystery. I pray for the goddess's loving grace. I encountered Blasphemer Amon's avatar in Backland. He was gathering the characteristics of a marauder pathway demigod. I seek for the blessings of concealment so as to complete the mission of eradicating the blasphemer's avatars. Night vanilla, a herb that belongs to the red moon. Please pass my supplication to the goddess. Moonflower, a herb that belongs to the red moon. Please pass my supplication to the goddess. After he was done chanting, Klein patiently waited for a while, but nothing happened. There wasn't any reply. The goddess is in a critical period of gaining control over the death pathway's uniqueness and is unable to respond beyond anything normal? Should I try to pray to artificial death? After all, if there are the blessings of concealment, Amon wouldn't be able to see it. If it doesn't, then the source of stirring destiny wouldn't point to me. Klein frowned little by little as he ended the ritual and cleared the altar. He felt that he needed to find other solutions. After he finished clearing the desk and turned around, prepared to head for the reclining chair, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. The figure wore a simple linen robe with signs of patching. By the figure's waist was a belt made of tree bark. Raven black hair cascaded down freely as the figure's feet didn't wear any socks or shoes, making them covered in dust and wounds. It was a lady. She had extremely normal facial features. Her ghostly black eyes were no different from the common person, but just looking at her left Klein feeling a sense of extreme peace and serenity. Even though feelings of alarm rose up within him, they were unable to overpower the peacefulness. Chapter 992 Erodes's Congratulations. You are? Klein asked in a rather complicated state of calmness. The lady in a simple robe nodded and said, Ariana, servant of concealment. Servant of concealment. Ariana. Klein's eyes constricted, as he knew who the lady was. As a former Nighthawk, how could he not be aware of the name Ariana? She was the Evernight Cloister's matron, head of the 13 archbishops, a likely candidate for the future pope. Regardless of which identity she had, She was part of the general knowledge that couldn't be avoided in religious studies and mysticism. As for the name, Servant of Concealment, Klein had read about it in Emperor Roselle's diary. Considering the similar name of Attendant of Mysteries, he suspected that this pointed to an angel. Meanwhile, based on the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation, with a sequence O in existence, it meant that Attendant of Mysteries couldn't be a sequence 1 angel. Therefore, Klein believed that the Servant of Concealment was likely sequence 2 of the Evernight pathway. It isn't that the goddess didn't reply, but that she used a very special way to respond. She directly sent her servant over. Klein felt mixed emotions that could hardly be described. He fell silent for a few seconds before giving a solemn bow. "Good afternoon, Your Eminence." In the various churches, if a demigod at the angel level walked the land, there was a need to address them as Your Eminence as a show of respect. Likewise, towards the pontiff, pope, and chief shepherd representatives of the deities, one had to use Your Holiness. In addition, a church's head was synonymous with the Holy See or Apostolic See. Of course, many a time, the Holy See could also represent the church's headquarters itself. Ariana tapped her chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion and replied in a pious manner, "May the goddess bless you." She then said, "I'm an ascetic. You can just call me ma'am." "Yes, ma'am Ariana." Klein didn't insist. Ariana looked at him calmly for 2 seconds and directly asked, "You plan to deal with blasphemer Amon's avatars in Backlund?" "Yes, I wish to obtain the blessings of concealment," Klein frankly replied. At this moment, he felt a little stumped because this was different from what he expected. He originally expected the goddess to answer by blessing him. Then, he and Palez Zoroast could join forces to wipe out all of Amon's avatars in Backlund. During this process, it wouldn't expose Leonard or the Marauder Pathway Angel. But now, with the blessings becoming something corporeal that would be involved in the battle, Palez Zoroast would immediately be discovered once he took action. When that happened, it was hard to predict what would ensue. Don't tell me I don't need to ally with Palez Zoroast? I'll only get him to provide intel and then split some of the spoils of war. Klein's thoughts rapidly ran through his mind as Ariana spoke unhurriedly. I can provide the power of concealment to shield everything that happens from the prying of fate. However, I cannot guarantee that I can eliminate all of Amon's avatars in Backlund. Palez Zoroast said that he has the means of doing so. The person who understands Amon the best is indeed a sequence 1 of the same pathway. Klein thought and said, "Ma'am Ariana, I have already come up with a well-thought-out plan. All you need is to provide the power of concealment. You do not need to be involved in the actual battle. Leave the rest to me." Ariana nodded and raised her right arm as she spread her palm. Points of light lit up, profound and resplendent as they quickly outlined an emblem in her palm. This emblem was completely crystallized, as though it was made of obsidian. It made one realize its existence when looking at it, but it appeared to vanish when not looking at it. "This is my Evernight coat of arms. It doesn't possess any characteristics or power by itself. The only use is that, when triggered, it will establish a connection with me, regardless of where you are in the real world," Ariana explained simply. "Before you begin your operation, remember to use it. I will provide you with the power of concealment. If you need more direct assistance, use Ancient Hermes to chant Ariana when triggering it. This is equivalent to an itemized altar and ritual that points to her. Oh, at the level of angel, the range of responding to prayers has extended to the entire world?" Klein instantly grasped the true nature of the Evernight coat of arms. As a bizarro sorcerer, he did not have the means to reply to prayers. This was a trait that could be obtained only at sequence 3. Of course, as Sea God and the Fool, he was very well versed in such matters. Klein didn't stand on ceremony as he accepted it and bowed sincerely. "Thank you." After saying that, he tapped 4 spots in a clockwise manner on his chest, forming the sign of the crimson moon. Praise the lady. This way, he could still join forces with Palez Zoroast. As long as he triggered the Evernight coat of arms without using Ancient Hermes to chant Ariana's name, everything would be fine. "Praise the lady," Ariana replied piously. Her figure then vanished as though she had been erased by an eraser. This is a departure by entering a concealed state? Klein pursed his lips in thought. Meanwhile, he was filled with suspicion over Ariana's swift arrival. After all, the Evernight pathway wasn't well versed in methods such as teleport. To go from Winter County all the way to Backlund required a significant amount of time. My ritual isn't the kind that prays for a direct descent. Could it be that Ma'am Ariana happened to be in the vicinity, in the Backland diocese? Isn't that too much a coincidence? If it isn't one, it only serves to exacerbate the problem. What is she doing in Backland? The undercurrents are stirring. Klein retracted his gaze and patiently waited a while before turning back into Dwayne Dantes. He found a pen and some paper once again, and drew the symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. When the final stroke was written, the full-body mirror in the master bedroom produced a dark but pure light, as though a silent undercurrent was surging out from the bottom of a lake. Right on the heels of that, fireworks appeared, bursting in the sky. Colors of gold, silver, red, and blue exploded as words formed in the mirror. "Welcome back, great master. Your humble servant, Rhodes, has witnessed the retrieval of a portion of your authority. I'm thrilled that you are gradually recovering your aura. You will eventually return to your supreme position and make the entire world turn silent under your watch." This is really passionate. There's always something new. Klein nodded in silence. Amidst the fireworks, those words dissipated and formed into a new sentence. "Great master, what instructions do you have for me?" "I have a question," Klein said calmly. "In a place where being in darkness can result in danger, how should one create a safe but pure darkness? There are two kinds of dangers involved. One, it will make a person directly vanish in the darkness, and two, it will cause strange monsters to appear and attack." The fireworks in the full-body mirror calmed down as aqueous light rippled. Silver words surfaced one after another. "Great master, are you referring to the forsaken land of the gods? This magic mirror actually knows quite a lot. He also gave me a free question in passing." Klein nodded and said, "That's right." Without any breaks in between, Rhodes's full-body mirror produced new lines of Loanese text. The formation of the forsaken land of the gods is related to the second creator's fall. The danger of night there stems from the transformation of two essential powers. First, it's the remnants of the Evernight goddess's divine powers. Second, it's the influence left behind by the creator. He wielded partial authority over shadows, darkness, fallen, corruption, and mutation. The former makes creatures vanish into thin air, while the latter produced monsters in the darkness. So the two types of danger stem from different powers. It's no wonder that there's such huge differences. Rhodes called the ancient sun god the second creator. This is very close to my theory. Amon's and Adam's father isn't the reawakening of the original creator, but a transmigrator who inherited a huge inheritance? Klein asked in thought. In that case, the Evernight goddess was involved in the fall of the second creator? This was something Klein had vaguely expected. This was from the trait of humans evaporating in the darkness of the forsaken land of the gods. It was very similar to the strange disappearances if one didn't sleep at night in the ruins of the Battle of the Gods. And based on Little Sun's description, king of demonic wolves, Phlegria, who wielded control over the Evernight and concealment authorities, had long perished in the second epoch. It was impossible that he had done it. Therefore, unless there was another deity of the Evernight pathway born in the middle, it was difficult for the two abnormalities to not have the Evernight goddess involved. On the surface of the mirror, the silver light rapidly converged, forming a short sentence. "That's right. That's right." Klein was just about to press on when he immediately shut up. He had just recalled one of his identities, blessed of the Evernight. Therefore, even without anyone watching him, he had to show respect to the deity and not seek out relevant secrets. Of course, time in the mysterious space above the gray fog was excluded. He was just about to focus on the main question from before to urge Rhodes to list out solutions when he saw the silver words in the full-body mirror change. "Great master, your loyal servant, Rhodes, wishes a small favor from you. See, can we not discuss matters regarding the Evernight goddess?" At the end of the question, a simple stick figure was drawn. "Just as I wished." Klein deliberately pondered for 2 seconds and said, "Okay." The silver swirls on the surface of the mirror immediately turned brisk as words began taking form. "As for the question you asked, there are two solutions. One is to accept the corruption and let oneself transform into monsters of the darkness. The reason why these creatures do not vanish into thin air during the night is because they have received the protection of the fallen authority. This way, all the darkness is equivalent to safety. The second is to create a darkness that comes with the dream world. This will allow the spirit body to receive the protection of the dream, thus slowing down the encroachment of danger at night." Chapter 993. Another possibility allowing the spirit body to receive protection of a dream to slow down the encroachment of danger at night. This is similar to the necessity to sleep when night fell in the ruins of the battlefield of the gods. Also, the powers in the forsaken land of the gods likely isn't under the goddess's control. Once one vanishes in the darkness over there, they definitely won't enter the foggy town. Where will it point towards? Or would they stay in the same spot, unable to interact with companions and the real world until they die of starvation or old age? After reading Rhodes's reply, Klein was somewhat enlightened as he roughly grasped the crux of the issue. However, he felt that this wasn't necessarily useful, because the sun only required pure darkness so that he could be buried in ice that normally wouldn't melt to consume the Priest of Light potion. Once he entered a dream, there was no way for him to control his own body to complete that critical step. That way, even if he could remain in the darkness for prolonged periods of time, it would be meaningless. Yes, I'll wait until Little Sun asks the chief of the City of Silver before coming up with an actual plan based on his answer. Of course, before that, I can try to get a corresponding solution from Leonard to figure out how to create darkness with a temporary dream world. Klein nodded slightly, acknowledging the answer provided by the magic mirror. As for the first option of accepting corruption and turning into a monster in the darkness, it wasn't even considered. In the extraordinary world, this was equivalent to committing suicide, which almost couldn't be reversed. Upon considering how he still had one question left to ask, Klein deliberated and asked, "Where can I obtain the potion formula of the Seer Pathways Sequence 3, Scholar of Yore?" The full-body mirror's surface had aqueous light ripple once again as it reflected a dark cathedral without any natural light. Klein found this scene very familiar as he immediately recalled what it represented. This was where Zeratul, who had turned into a monster, hid. However, this time, deep inside the cathedral, the cluster of blurry and huge maggots were no longer present. Just as Klein's pupils dilated, the silver words appeared beneath the scene depiction. "Great Master, Zeratul has vanished. I can't find him." Vanished. Klein momentarily forgot to breathe. Although he had long known of Zeratul's return, since he was the one who began the chain reaction by opening the door to the foggy town, he never expected this big shot to secretly leave the cathedral, his whereabouts becoming unknown. Even Rhodes is unable to locate him. What is he plotting? The more Klein thought, the more a chill ran down his back. Having become a Sequence 4 demigod, he could confirm one thing. His control over the mysterious world above the grey fog was still insufficient. He could temporarily only converge the leaking specialness that it had augmented him with in the real world, making it difficult for Beyonders of corresponding pathways to see it, but it was unable to repress the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence. As for the grey fog, it had proven time and time again that he had an invisible form of attraction towards Beyonders of the Seer, Apprentice, and Marauder pathway. Amongst them, the effects on the Seer pathway was most evident. Besides, I myself am quite an attractive Sequence 4 Bizarro sorcerer. It's not impossible for Zeratul to suddenly come to Backlund one day. Klein maintained a deadpan expression and said to the full-body mirror that was switching scenes, "Got it." Antigonus presented another scene which Klein was equally familiar with. It was the Antigonus family's treasure trove, at the peak of the Hornacis mountain range. Below this scene, silver words quickly surfaced once again. "Great Master, there's another possibility, but I can't tell. I just know that it's easier than the first two." The Antigonus family's notebook isn't there this time? That's right. It will lead the wielder to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range to seek out the Antigonus family's treasure trove. It's basically the same as the previous option. What's the possibility that even Rhodes can't tell? Based on what I know about the factions in control of the Seer pathway, it's implying that I should pray to the goddess for it? The goddess is the mother of concealment, so Xueqi can choose whether Rhodes can see it or not. Klein's thoughts scattered and quickly made a connection. Of course, he didn't believe that directly praying for the Scholar of Your potion formula would allow him to get it. It was too ridiculous, as though it was child's play. From his experience as a Nighthawk, he suspected that he might need to make enough contributions before he could obtain the Scholar of Your potion formula from the Evernight goddess via a ritual. Making enough contributions. This sure is a familiar phrase. Klein sighed as he began having some ideas. Clearly, he had hints on how to do so handle the artificial death faction of the numinous episcopate. However, Klein suspected that the goddess only had up to the Scholar of Your sequence for the Seer pathway potion formulas, and not the subsequent ones at the angel level. This was because the Antigonus family's angel didn't perish immediately back then but had hidden in a secret palace, losing control to become a monster and was in a half-sealed state. In addition, the Fool card was also there and hadn't been retrieved yet. At this moment, Klein had the intention of asking about Amon's avatars, but he suddenly recalled that within the memories of the rat demigod, the warning about the Marauder Pathway Angel and Amon had been given by this very mirror. As his thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein narrowed his eyes, looked at the full-body mirror, and nodded. All right, that's it for today. Head back. If there's anything in the future, I'll summon you again. Yes, Master. Goodbye, Master. Your loyal and humble servant, Rhodes, is constantly waiting to return to your side. Light gathered on the mirror's surface, depicting a stick figure waving its hand. After everything returned to normal, Klein turned around and picked up the paper with the previously drawn symbol. With a snap of his fingers, he made it burst into scarlet flames. The ash floated down as he spread open his left hand. In it were 2 maggots shimmering with solid mysterious symbols. The 2 maggots squirmed gently, using their life force to fill the entire bedroom with madness and bizarreness. The surrounding lights then dimmed and brightened from time to time in a non-uniform fashion. They were none other than the worms of spirit which Klein had separated from himself. Suddenly, Klein reached out his right palm, suddenly pressing them towards the 2 transparent maggots. Instantly, his palm paused, just short of touching the worms of spirit. He raised his palm again, lowering it only to pause. He repeated this several times until he finally exerted his strength with a deadpan expression. Amidst an invisible and illusory cracking sound, his head suddenly felt a stabbing pain. This made his soul feel like it was being ripped apart. It was even more painful than encountering a gunshot or a slash wound. Klein used his clown powers to control the twitching of his facial muscles. After a few seconds, he raised his right hand to rub his temples, inwardly mumbling, "Indeed, the death of every worm of spirit deals damage to the spirit body. My current limit is 6. I'll temporarily stop trying. Let's see how long it takes to recover. Thankfully, this is a tolerable matter. Otherwise, it would be dangerous if a marionette is destroyed while the worm of spirit isn't able to be collected in time due to an intense battle. Yes, it's different from Amon's worms of time avatars. A Bizarro sorcerer's worms of spirit will not necessarily die when a marionette is destroyed. Most of the time, a Bizarro sorcerer is able to retrieve them in time. It's because the distance between the body and the marionette isn't that exaggerated. After confirming the situation, and waiting for the Beyonder characteristics contained within the worms of spirit to return to himself, Klein rummaged for some materials and set up a ritual to pray to the fool. After a series of tasks, Klein used the carcasses of 2 worms of spirit, 2 silver plates, and the complicated symbol which he had previously recorded down to make 2 silver black bullets, of which the latter came from Snake of Mercury Willow Septon. The 2 bullets were carved with strange, indescribable patterns. They kept extending inwards as though they were coming together in the middle at one point. Their entire bodies were gloomy but not dark. Just one look at it made one's thoughts sluggish. Klein flicked a gold coin and used divination, together with his spiritual intuition, to swiftly determine the abilities of the 2 bullets. The target would immediately enter a state of paralysis upon being hit. The length of time that one was left in this state depended on the potency of one's spirit body. Even Sequence 3 Saints would be in a state of stiffness for a second or 2. This already exceeds my powers. Of course, the premise is that contact can be made. Oh, this is a result of the Grey Fog's augmentation. These 2 bullets should be at the same level as the Fate Siphon charms. Although my worms of spirit can't be compared to Amon's and Pala's worms of time, the amount of power I can now draw from the mysterious space above the Grey Fog is clearly superior to what I could do in the past. I shall call them, Control Spirit Bullets. Klein drew Death Knell from his underarm holster, snapped open the cylinder wheel, and stuffed the 2 silver-black Control Spirit Bullets inside. Following that, he spread open a piece of paper beside the altar and wrote, "Next, your mission is to seek out relatively high-level charms and Beyonder bullets. May God be with you. XXX who raised 3 requests from you." This letter was written to Patrick Bryan of the Numinous Episcopate's Artificial Death faction. With a subordinate at my disposal, why let him go to waste? As Klein mumbled, he folded his letter. At the altar from before, he summoned Patrick Bryan's messenger. The surface of the desk burst into pitch-black flames and quickly gathered together, forming a translucent bird with dark feathers. This spirit world creature glanced at Klein before slowly lowering its head to bite at the envelope. Watching it disappear, Klein nodded slightly and inwardly muttered, "Patrick's contract companion isn't of a low level either." He quickly reined in his thoughts, took out another letter and fluidly wrote, "I have already obtained the blessing of concealment. You can attempt to gather items at the Marauder Pathway demigod level. In addition, I found a way to crack the theft and replacement of destiny. You don't have to be too anxious. Do you know how to create a darkness that includes a temporary dream world? If you have the time, can you head to Tinjin and help me use 3-0782 to create flaring sun bullets? The mutated sun's sacred emblem has the divine blood of the eternal blazing sun hidden in it. Only by sufficiently raising your strength can we be more confident at dealing with Amon's avatars. Chapter 994 Prelude at 7 Pinster Street. Leonard, who had specially returned home to participate in the tarot gathering, was just about to head to St. Samuel Cathedral's basement to read the dossiers so as to make preparations for his placating of souls at night when his vision suddenly went into a blur. He saw the messenger in a dark, full dress holding 4 blonde red-eyed heads. As a soul assurer, he could already see such creatures with spirit bodies. After taking Klein's letter, Leonard didn't even have the chance to say thank you when Rionette Tynker turned around and walked into the void. She didn't even stay for long. Old man, why does Klein have a messenger of this level? Is this a perk of being a blessed? Leonard couldn't help but ask Palaz Zoroast with a suppressed voice. He originally fantasized that it was standard for every tarot club member, but he later realized that he had been imagining things. Palaz Zoroast's slightly aged voice chuckled immediately. It is likely to solely belong to Klein Moretti. Everyone receives some special fortuitous encounter. Isn't that the case? Isn't it the same even for a fellow like you? Haha, I thought you would use incomplete angel to describe her, but you ended up using messenger of this level. Not bad. You still remember my warning. Leonard curled the corners of his lips, spread open the piece of paper, and read the content on it. He's indeed the blessed of concealment and fate. Palaz Zoroast quickly scanned the heading through Leonard's eyes. Leonard didn't look at the ground. Instead, he took a few steps back and threw himself into the embrace of the sofa before saying, Klein can see through the theft and replacement of destiny. Then, we don't need to rush to seek out items at the Marauder Pathway demigod level. Even if you were in a hurry, you have no idea where to seek them out, Palaz scoffed. Even for the gathering of the Hermits of Fate, similar items needed years to appear even once. And the next gathering was to happen at the end of the year. Leonard was momentarily at a loss for words and could only cast his gaze at the last 2 paragraphs. After a brief silence he chuckled. I've always been curious as to where Klein received the high-level charm of the Sun Domain when facing Megos. I thought it was provided to him by that Death Consul, but I couldn't understand why a Death Domain angel would be gathering high-level charms of the Sun Domain. Wouldn't that be suicide? Now, I finally understand. Old man, I wielded 3-0782 before as well. Why didn't you notice that there was a drop of the eternal blazing sun's divine blood hidden in that? If you could have stolen some of its power back then, things wouldn't have. Leonard originally wanted to mock old man, but as he went on, he fell silent. Palaz Zoroast sighed in his mind. If that drop of divine blood could be so easily discovered, that mutated sun's sacred emblem wouldn't have been in Tinjin. Leonard fell silent for a few seconds before asking, then how am I to create an opportunity to get that sacred emblem to create the flaring sun charm? Although Klein made it sound simple in his letter, Leonard knew that it wasn't an easy task. This was because he wasn't a Nighthawk of Tinjin City. Even if he returned to visit his former colleagues and teammates, he had no authority to enter Cheney's gate. Upon hearing his question, Palaz Zoroast replied in a peeved manner. Why are you asking me something as trivial as this? Can't you think for yourself? Leonard coughed uncomfortably as he began thinking seriously to seek out a solution. I'm currently working alone, but the Archbishop has given me the authority to get the help of the local Nighthawks in the region of question. If all the souls in Backlund have been placated, and if I haven't finished digesting my potion, wouldn't I have to do it at other dioceses? When that happens, if Tinjin happens to have a paranormal accident, it will be very reasonable for me to return and get 2 Nighthawks and use 3-0782. After Leonard finished muttering to himself, Palaz Zoroast chuckled. Not bad. You came up with an idea so quickly. But have you thought about it? You are placating them, not purifying them. This is contradictory with obtaining 3-0782. It will easily incur suspicion. Leonard, who had been praised, immediately laughed. Old man, that's because you aren't aware. Back when I joined the Nighthawks team, there was one line in the education I received. Only under the premise of having the ability to purify can placating achieve the best results. Emperor Roselle had also once said that to solve problems, you need a stick in one hand and a carrot in the other. Palaz Zorost immediately sked. Then follow your plan. Of course, that's assuming that you can finish Anthony Stevenson's missions in a week or two. If you haven't obtained the sun flare bullets before the actual operation of eliminating Amon begins, then it would no longer be necessary. Leonard recalled the list of missions written on the pieces of paper as his forehead twitched. He then forced himself to forget about his worries and mumbled, I wonder when the mission to punish the Sanguine will begin. I wonder if the Sanguine has a sealed artifact at the Marauder Pathways demigod level. Temporary dream world. I can create it myself. I'll find a chance to make some charms, but can power at this level be able to resist the corrosion of the darkness in the forsaken land of the gods? In an apartment in Sherwood Borough, Furs took out a novel, sat on the sofa, and watched Zio walk towards the lobby as she wore her boots to head out. Finally, Furs couldn't hold back her puzzlement as she said, There's no rush. That gentleman said that he wouldn't assign the mission that quickly. Zio shot her a glance and said, I'm a bounty hunter. I have other missions. Upon saying that, she paused and said after some deliberation, Furs, do you think that Miss Justice resembles Miss Audrey? Furs was taken aback for a few seconds before she snapped back to senses. She subconsciously waved her hand and chuckled. How is that possible? Just as she said that, the similarities began flashing through her mind, her eyes widening in response. After a while she whispered, It's not impossible. Spectator pathway, psychology alchemists, noble lady, blonde hair and green eyes. She's the only noble I know that meets those criteria. Of course, I don't know that many nobles. Furthermore, I have no idea if the ones I'm familiar with have anything to do with the psychology alchemists. Zio silently listened to her friend and said after some thought, Furs, do you still remember the missions assigned to us by Miss Audrey? I originally thought that it was issued by Earl Hall, but on second thought, perhaps it came from the tarot gathering. Also, how did we know of Mr. Fool's honorific name? Do you remember? It was from books we borrowed from Viscount Glaint. In the book cover was a strange ancient slip. Furs nodded in enlightenment. If we could discover it, as a good friend of Viscount Glaint, Miss Audrey has a chance of discovering it as well. This can explain why she joined the gathering. Yeah, Zio agreed with Furs's guess. Furs opened her mouth and was just about to say something when she recalled that the matter with the Sanguine wasn't completely over. She immediately looked around warily and said, Zio, we should lessen our discussions of gatherings in the future. As for Miss Audrey, we can visit her once every week or two. We can continue observing when the time comes. Zio snapped to her senses and nodded heavily. All right. She then opened her door and went to a particular bar in East Borough and sat by the bar counter. Rapping on the table, she said to the bartender who looked up, Any new missions today? The bartender gave a rough list without mentioning any investigations of a particular Mr. Ernst Boyar. Indeed, I'll have to wait till tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Zio looked around, retracted her gaze, and asked in puzzlement and concern, I haven't seen Sherman in a while. Do you know where he's been? Sherman was a young man who thought himself as a woman one of Zio's informants. The bartender chuckled. Perhaps he ran off with some man. You do know that he's happy to do so if a man fancies him. This isn't something worth ostracizing him about, Zio rebutted seriously, feeling a baffling sense of concern. She then exerted strength in her palm and jumped off the high stool, prepared to seek out Sherman in the places he was usually seen. Backland Bridge area, Iron Gate Street, Braveheart's Bar. Holding down his hat, Emlyn pinched his nose as he passed through the crowd that exuded all kinds of smells before finding the red-eyed Ian in the card room. Mr. White, what is it this time? Ian smiled as he led Emlyn into an empty billiard room. Emlyn took off his hat and quipped, Something trivial. Help me put up a mission to the bounty hunters. The details of the mission is to track a man named Ernst Boyar. Figure out his daily activities. The bounty reward will be £100. £100? Ian subconsciously asked. For investigations like tracking, £100 was quite a ridiculous reward. One had to know that if a bounty hunter was able to complete this mission on their own, they could rest for an entire year, even if they were supporting a family. Emlyn nodded. The target is rather dangerous. After the discussion back with the Tarot Club, he had already thought it through. He believed that tracking Ernst Boyar was an easy mission. The Sanguine Viscount would definitely pretend as though he didn't notice anything and deliberately follow a fixed trajectory. Therefore, this £100 was in fact payment for misjudgment to take the risk of participating in this operation. Of course, to aid in the misdirection and concealment, it was almost certain that more than one bounty hunter would complete this mission, allowing them to earn different portions of the reward. All Emlyn could guarantee was that misjudgment would earn the most. I see. Coming to an understanding, Ian extended his hand. Down payment, exact address, level of danger, looks and characteristics. It's best if you have a portrait. Ernst Boyar then gave £30 in cash and Ernst Boyar's portrait. Red eyes? Ian flipped through the pieces of paper in his hand and couldn't help but blurt out. Yes. Emlyn nodded gently and looked around him. He suppressed his voice and said, There's also something else. Help me seek out clues regarding the Rose School of Thought members in Backland. Rose School of Thought? Ian was taken aback as he asked in puzzlement, as though he had never heard of the name. Chapter 995, Conjoined Person. Emlyn glanced at Lon, raised his hand to pinch his nose, and chuckled. It appears you don't understand me. It's okay. A more simple description is to gather information about foreigners that come from the southern continent, especially from the Star Highlands and the Paws River Valley. What information do you want exactly? There are plenty of pure-blooded people from the southern continent in Backland. Those that you've mentioned are also common, Ian calmly asked without flaring up due to the contempt he received. Emlyn laughed. The ones that are a bit more abnormal. They do things in a fishy manner and seem to all be mysterious. You should understand what I'm getting at. There are definitely many people you describe. In Backland, they are either servants, workers, or thieves being part of gangs. As the latter will all meet your criteria of being abnormal, fishy, and mysterious. Ian sincerely pointed out how unpragmatic Emlyn's request was. Emlyn was already prepared for this. With an unobvious smile, he nodded slightly. Then, give me all the information that meets those criteria. I'll do the filtering. Oh, I'll pay £50 as down payment for this commission as the standard fees for the early stage investigations. The subsequent payment will be counted based on how much information of value is provided. Each one will cost £20. Who is the one to determine its worth? Ian asked after a few seconds of thought. For him, having a £50 income for preliminary work like this was enough for him to accept the job. It was more than enough to hire a dozen people or so to investigate the areas from East Borough to Cherwood Borough for half a month. He didn't mind how much he could only from the £50, as there were many people here who relied on him for their survival. He needed to arrange jobs with payment for them to do from time to time. Otherwise, he would never be able to be kept abreast with the latest developments. Emlyn sized up Ian and scoffed. Of course it will be me. You should know how trustworthy I am. Detective Moriarty never told me that. Ian mumbled and sighed. All right. Our last cooperation was still pretty good. I choose to trust you. Emlyn nodded in satisfaction, took out his wallet, and counted another £50 worth of notes. During this process, Emlyn momentarily felt the pinch when he realized he only had £407 in savings. And now there's only £357. He looked away from the notes and handed the cash to Ian. He didn't stay. Putting on his hat, he walked out of the billiard room and left the Bravehearts bar. On the street, Emlyn stopped pinching his nose and looked up at the flame-like clouds. His expression gradually fell heavy as he silently muttered, That wraith from before isn't around. Where did it go? Humph, Ian acted as though he had never heard of the Rose School of Thought, but his racing heartbeat had betrayed him. Also, he actually didn't ask if Sherlock Moriarty is back in Backland. He didn't even show any concern. Could it be that Sherlock has already returned to Backland and that he has already met him? Rorstad Archipelago, City of Generosity, Byam. In an area near the harbour, Admiral of Stars Catlia had brought along Frank Lee, who had his sleeves rolled up which revealed his brown hair, to an area outside a house with gas wall lamps. They came to an empty corner and watched as a figure appeared out of the shadows. It was bloodless Heath Doyle who was in charge of monitoring artisan Sealf. He was thin and his skin was so pale that it was transparent. He looked so frail that a gust of wind could topple him. Did anything strange happen recently? Catlia nudged the gold-rimmed glasses on her nose. Heath Doyle tersely acknowledged. 3 days after you left, a stranger visited Sealf. He stayed for about 15 minutes. I didn't approach for fear of being discovered. Based on your instructions, I sent men to tail the stranger, but they lost his trail. What did that stranger look like? Katlia asked with a slight nod. Heath Doyle took out a piece of raw beef from a leather pouch by his waist. The blood on it remained fresh, but it didn't show any signs of contamination. It appeared to be a pure piece of solid meat. Right on the heels of that, this piece of beef melted in Heath Doyle's hand, dripping to the ground like water. They then squirmed like they had life, drawing a portrait. This is the effect I want. Frank Lee's eyes shimmered as he watched this scene, expressing his intentions with excitement. Under his gaze, Heath Doyle had the intention to run, but he slightly slanted his body and pointed to the ground. Roughly like this. At this moment, a blood portrait had already taken form. It was that of a man with a mustache, with facial features that resembled that of the Paws River Valley. His greatest characteristic was the 3 ear studs on both his ears. Golden ear studs, thin body, not much fat, very athletic, Heath Doyle added. Katlia retracted her gaze from the ground and asked, "And then?" Heath Doyle tersely acknowledged. No one visited Sealf after that, other than his temporary servants and chef he hired. I got men to investigate them. They are clean. Sealf has an evening stroll at a fixed time every day. He will bring a prostitute home, allowing her to leave only at daybreak. I've been constantly tailing him, but I never discovered any contact with odd people. He has been acting very normally all this time? Katlia asked with a frown. From her point of view, not having any abnormalities made it most abnormal. After all, this involved Rowe's school of thought members that believed in the primordial moon. Heath Doyle nodded in affirmation. Yes. Katlia turned her head to look at the building's main door and said after some thought, I actually planned on using Beyonder powers to infiltrate and bring Sealf under control in the fastest speed possible before taking him away to prevent any accidents. But from the looks of it, the best solution is to knock on the door. Unknown danger was what terrified people the most. At the thought that he had been busy with his experiments recently and hadn't done his duty as first mate, Frank Lee hurriedly said, Captain, I'll go with you. Katlia took off her thick glasses and hung them by her waist of her black warlock robe before nodding. Okay. With that said, she left the shadowy corner and walked towards the main door of Sealf's residence. As she approached, she looked up at the crimson moon that could be seen penetrating through the clouds. She curled her fingers and tapped thrice on the door. Before long, footsteps approached and the door creaked open. Sealf didn't show any obvious changes from the previous time. He remained thin and dark. His eyes were somewhat puffy, and his brown eyes were trying hard to force a smile. Admiral, is there something this time? He stood by the door, blocking the gas wall lamp's light behind him. It made the area appear dark and gloomy, as though he was sinking into the shadows. Katlia stared at him for a few seconds before saying slowly, I have a new idea. I plan on making you a part of my crew. She stood there motionlessly without any intention of stepping inside. Sealf's expression warped as his voice turned somewhat dark. Why? Katlia's eyes seemed to freeze as she slowly said, Because I'm a pirate. Pirates didn't need reasons. They did whatever they did out of their own desires. Sealf's facial muscles twitched as a smile suffused his eyes once again. I can be your sailor, but as an artisan, I'll be of much greater use in a city. I agree. Katlia destroyed his resistance. But before then, I need you to spend some time on the future to be partners with others. Sealf's expression gradually turned cold as he replied in an ethereal voice. I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself. I have a strong urge to procreate every day. Strong urge to procreate? Frank Lee's eyes lit up as he asked, seemingly in confirmation. Sealf was taken aback as he wasn't sure whether to nod or shake his head. Frank then looked at Katlia and asked in excitement, Captain, is he going to be my assistant for my experiments? I love this trait of his. Katlia fell silent for a few seconds before nodding heavily. Yes. Frank immediately revealed a bright smile and offered his right hand to Artisan Sealf. Pleasure to meet you. Let me introduce myself. First mate of the future, Frank Lee. Sealf's expression returned to normal as he shook the man's hand with puzzlement. Then he said, Am I really going to spend a short period of time on the future? I guarantee it with my reputation on the line, Katlia sincerely replied before inwardly adding, It wouldn't take long before Her Majesty personally handles you. All right. It's not like I can beat you. Sealf shrugged. Please permit me to pack my personal belongings. He then took 2 steps back, turned around, and walked to the staircase at the end of the foyer. As he walked, he suddenly paused and said in an ethereal tone to Katlia and Frank Lee, "Today's moonlight is as beautiful as it always has been, isn't it?" Without receiving a reply, he proceeded forward and vanished from the staircase. At this moment, Katlia's heavy expression became obvious. After Sylph opened the door, she had already noticed an abnormality with her eyes. In the past, Sylph's spirit body was that of an ordinary human, but now, he was a conjoined person. Under the illumination of the moonlight, this conjoined person was being nourished and was rapidly growing stronger. "This isn't a problem I can resolve. I have to write to Her Majesty. Also, I mustn't forget Gairman Sparrow's request for a meeting." Katlia sighed silently as she subconsciously looked up. High in the sky, a crimson moon remained bright and silent amidst the thin clouds. Backlund, Hilston Backlund, East Balham Military Veterans Mess. Dwayne Dantes and Mocht got off their separate carriages and entered the lobby together. Chapter 996 Card Game. After entering the East Balham Military Veterans Mess, Klein handed his cane and hat to his valet, Anuni, only to see Colonel Calvin of the Lone Kingdom's Ministry of Defense wearing an army uniform, waiting at the foyer with a glass of red wine in hand. This long-faced officer smiled as he raised his cup at Dwayne Dantes. "Long time no see. It really has been a while." Klein smiled as he walked over. Colonel Calvin immediately offered his right hand. "Congratulations. You did pretty well." Everyone was very pleased. "I was very pleased as well." Klein used a Lone-styled euphemism to express his pleasure in cooperating. He then shook hands with him. Calvin retracted his arm and glanced at Mocht before he said with a laughing sigh, "Back when you first introduced Dwayne, I was quite distrustful of your judgment, but now I understand how you're a member of Parliament. Anyone who interacts with Dwayne can easily tell that he's an expert at this." Mocht accepted the colonel's approbation with the same Lone-styled euphemism. Calvin retracted his gaze, sipped some red wine, and smiled at Dwayne Dantes, asking in passing, "How much did you earn this time?" "Don't worry, I won't raise prices in the future because of it. I'm simply curious." £20,000 in gold. Klein gave the midpoint value as an answer. In actual fact, he had earned £25,000, but after paying Miss Messenger £10,000 for her services, he had only earned £15,000. Calvin nodded. "Not bad. If you need to convert those gold bars into gold coins, I can introduce you to someone from an Imperial Mint factory." "How was it? Did you notice anything abnormal around May Sanchez's area?" Klein said directly without thinking, "Yes. There was a place called Revival Square under his control that was destroyed by lightning." "That I'm aware of," Calvin replied with a rather heavy expression. "But you probably do not know that the person before you was the one who created the lightning." Klein smiled and then said, "Also, May Sanchez seems to be maintaining a fragile balance among many factions. But in actual fact, he has already secretly aligned himself with a particular faction. Of course, I'm not exactly sure who it is." He had no intention of betraying the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. All he did was divulge a little to win the trust of the lone military. "The only thing that can be confirmed is that it isn't us," Calvin nodded and said with a deep look in his eyes. "It's unlikely to be Intis." Klein helped him eliminate one of the wrong choices. Calvin tersely acknowledged. "That isn't a bad thing either. The few factions surrounding May Sanchez are supported by Intis. If he wishes to expand, there's no way he can circumvent them. When the time comes, perhaps we will have more arms sales on our hands." With that said, he offered a toast. "Holy Lord of Storms, to riches for everyone." As believers of the Evernight goddess, Klein and Mocht smiled in response without giving a direct answer. After taking another sip of red wine, Calvin pointed at the second floor. "Dwayne, I brought you here today to play cards with a VIP. Texas Hold'em." "Which VIP?" Klein asked with piqued interest. Calvin's expression turned solemn as he said with an unobvious smile, "Admiral Amirius. He has been given a post and is currently in charge of the Ministry of Defense." Admiral Amirius. The admiral whose younger brother was stripped of his post as Governor-General, had his mistress corrupted by the Mother Tree of Desire, and ended up losing his post as highest commander of the Central Sonia Seas Navy? I've worked with him before and even pretended to be him for some time. Indeed, when it comes to a demigod, as long as they didn't screw up too badly, and if they are willing to hold it in, they will always be able to step out of the nadir. Klein recalled everything that had happened at Oravi Island. turning wistful. Towards Admiral Emerius Revolt, he still felt some guilt towards him. Although most of what happened back then didn't have anything to do with him, his mistress's anomaly was ultimately a result of the Mother Tree of Desire's wish to control him. That is to say that our future cooperation requires His Excellency's approval? Klein asked in enlightenment. That's how it is. Calvin nodded and pointed up the stairs. Let's head on up. When they arrived at the second floor, they stopped in front of a pair of dark red double doors. Calvin turned his head to glance at Dwayne Dantes. Your mission today is to lose money. Lose money? Klein sized up Calvin as he curled the ends of his mouth. I'll try my best. By the side, Mok said with a laugh. There's actually no need to be too deliberate. Admiral Emerius has excellent card-playing skills. It's almost impossible if you wish to win any money. Heh, I always lose. Sigh, I just hope I won't lose too much today. Otherwise, I wouldn't even dare to return home. Klein nodded thoughtfully. I only brought £200 in cash. Would that be enough? Definitely not. Calvin chuckled. I've already changed chips worth £1,000 for you. Just remember to return it. Loan's best lawyers only earn about £1,000 a year on the surface. You bunch of profligates. Klein sized up Calvin again. This colonel didn't notice it as he knocked on the door. After a while, the double door creaked open, revealing the scene inside. It was a hall paved with thick, soft carpets. There wasn't a lot of furniture, making it appear rather spacious. In the middle of the hall was a card table that could accommodate more than 10 people. Surrounding it were luxurious-styled high-back chairs. By the sides of the hall were gold-plated cutlery, marble-carved sculptures, coffee tables with books and newspapers, and a series of leather sofas. Klein looked over and saw Emerius Revolt sitting at the seat of honor. This admiral didn't look different from before. His black hair was neatly combed backward, with his blue eyes dark and profound. The corners of his lips drooped slightly, and his face was clean-shaven. He had an austere temperament, and he wore dark blue clothes with an epaulette. He was meticulous in every detail, appearing extremely serious. When he swept his gaze, Klein found another familiar person. He had thick but neat black brows with a short and hard crew cut of the same color. He had dark blue eyes and a high nose bridge with a bushy mustache spreading out from his mouth. He had a long face with accentuated outlines as well as callous curves. He was MI9's deputy director, Conas Kilgore. He was one of the targets for Klein's return to Backlund. He was the middleman in the dealings between the Demonist sect and a particular faction in the royal family. He was one of the accomplices of the Great Smog of Backlund. This brigadier general had abnormally broad shoulders, making his white shirt and black vest abnormally tight. He was playing Texas Hold'em with great focus. There are three demigods at a card table. How can this even be played? Interesting. Klein sat down and began observing the others at the table. During this process, an attendant delivered a huge stack of chips, worth a total of £1,000. In the first few rounds, Klein folded after looking at his cards. He acted very cautiously, acting as though he never called or raised unless he had good cards. As for Admiral Emerius, his style was the complete opposite of him. He was in no way conservative. He called almost every round, constantly raising in an extremely aggressive manner. Every round that he was involved in seldom reached the point where everyone showed their cards. Most people failed to withstand such aggression and, with the Admiral's domineering force, they would call a round or two before folding. At times, someone would attempt to call Emerius Revolt's bluff, only to encounter 4 nines. The color in his face instantly drained as though he had been passed the death verdict by a judge. Conas Kilgore had a completely different style as well. He would occasionally lose a round, but the chips lost wouldn't be much, preventing him from having too great a loss. And in the next round after his loss, he would often be able to wipe out the person who won all his chips the previous round, forcing him to spend money to buy in again. Is there a need? Why are you using powers to cheat when dealing with low and mid-sequence beyonders or even ordinary people? Others might not be able to tell, but would I be fooled? One has the Arbiter Pathway's dominance, and the other has the Baron of Corruption's bribe. Klein looked at his 5 of hearts and 9 of clubs as he shook his head indiscernibly. He couldn't help but consider which powers of a seer pathway could provide him help if he wanted to cheat. Turn all my opponents into marionettes? In that case I can win as much as I want. I'm practically invincible, but it's of no pragmatic value. It's not like I'm planning for some deathmatch poker tournament. Unfortunately, there aren't any mosquitoes here. Otherwise, I can use their spirit body threads and turn them into marionettes to help me check out their whole cards. Faceless only allows me to change myself, not the cards. Magician's illusion? The effects would likely be pretty good when playing with ordinary people or low and mid-sequence beyonders. But there are two demigods here. Use a clown's ability to swap cards? It's useless. The dealing and shuffling of cards are done by the croupier. As his thoughts raced, Klein realized that apparently only his powers as a seer was of use here. He threw out his 2 whole cards to indicate a fold before taking out a metal chip and allowing it to move between his fingers. At this moment, Amirius Revolt suddenly looked up at him and retracted his hands before pushing all his chips in. Indeed. Klein nodded inwardly without a hint of surprise. During his last cooperation, he knew that Admiral Amirius was able to distinguish ordinary people from beyonders from his position. He suspected that he could even determine a beyonder's level, or in other words their position. However, Klein wasn't too worried, because a Bizarro sorcerer had concealment powers to a certain degree. This was also why he could converge the augmentation effect the gray fog had on him after he reached sequence 4. This made him confident that Amirius wouldn't be able to determine his level. However, he didn't attempt any corresponding interference, as he suspected that Amirius was able to tell that he was a beyonder. Therefore he decided to reveal a tiny problem, making it easy to be seen through and be grasped. Chapter 997. Gambling God, Dwayne. The core rules of Texas Hold'em were very simple. It was to use 2 whole cards and 5 community cards to form a hand with any 5-card combination. Whoever had the biggest hand won. And the community cards were dealt in 3 phases. 3 community cards to form the flop in the first phase, a 4th community card called the turn in the second phase, and a 5th community card called the river in the third phase. Each phase allowed players to fold, check, call, or raise. This continued until everyone was done or until one person didn't fold. Klein fiddled with a chip in his hand as he divined the existence of any lucky instances within the next few rounds. However, he was unable to tell which exact round it was. After all, it was only a quick and simple divination with average effects. Using this method to play with ordinary people and low-sequence beyonders wouldn't be a problem as long as the correct strategy is used, but it's definitely inadequate against demigods. It's already quite a challenge to defeat a mid-sequence beyonder. Must I close my eyes each round and do a complete dream divination? Haha, if that were the case, Dwayne Dantes might end up with the title Sleeping Gambling God. Klein sighed inwardly. He continued watching the round play out as he sat by the side. At present, he had already lost a big blind and a small blind, sup when it was his turn. At this moment, Klein noticed one point. The MI9 deputy director, Konas Kilgore, had lost £20 to Admiral Amirius. A successful bribe. Admiral Amirius should be able to tell that Konas is using his powers as a baron of corruption, but he might not know that this MI9 deputy director is a demigod. The next round will be interesting. Hee. Klein jolted to attention as the new round began. He didn't check his whole cards when the croupier handed him 2 new ones. Instead, he placed the metal chip he was playing with in his hand onto his whole card, taking on the stance of not planning to look at them. After 2 people folded, the stern and old-fashioned Amirius Revolt casually took a look at his whole cards. After counting £5 worth of chips, he threw it into the middle of the table, having raised the stakes without garnering any surprises. Another person folded as mocked called. Right on the heels of that, Konas Kilgore, who had an unyielding personality, raised the stakes, throwing out a total of £20. Calvin confirmed his whole cards once again before calling. After one last person folded, Dwayne Dantes didn't do an actual count. He grabbed a handful of chips and threw it out. The croupier who was in charge of counting the chips glanced at it before precisely announcing Dwayne's action. £20. Call. I thought it would be £50. From the looks of it, I'm still not very used to these chips, the white-sideburn Dwayne Dantes with an outstanding temperament said with a laugh. However, he didn't add on the additional £30. At this moment, no one made a move. It was Amirius Revolt's turn again. This admiral didn't even glance at the remaining players. Picking up 5 10-pound chips, he threw them out. Another raise. He didn't show any perturbations in his emotions, acting as though he was ordering a cup of black tea. However, That indescribable sense of dominance and the act of repeatedly raising the stakes pre-flop made the mood at the table freeze. Such situations often implied that Admiral Emirius had excellent hole cards. Perhaps they were a pair of aces or a pair of kings, or an ace and king. Mock decided to fold. Conus Kilgore rubbed his high-nose bridge and glanced around with his dark blue eyes before saying, "Call." Colonel Calvin confirmed his cards again. After 10 seconds of hesitation, he chose to fold. Dwayne Dantes touched the metal chip on his 2 hole cards and smiled. "Call." After a round of expressing their intentions, there were only 3 players for the round. Then, the croupier flipped the 3 community cards in the middle of the table for the flop. 2 spade suit, 9 heart suit, K spade suit. The person who was up first was Admiral Emirius Revolt. He leaned forward slightly and said in a domineering manner, £50. He had immediately raised the stakes to £50. Mocked, Calvin and company, including those who weren't in the game, felt stifled for some baffling reason. Conus Kilgore trembled slightly, but he ultimately grabbed £50 and threw it out. Dwayne Dantes glanced at the deputy director of MI9. Completely unfazed by the pressure, he said with a smile, "Call." Upon hearing this, Calvin turned his head and nodded at Dwayne Dantes with his deep blue eyes that resembled a nighttime lake, indicating his approval. From his point of view, Admiral Emirius's domineering stance didn't affect a person who came to lose money. At this moment, the red-vested croupier revealed the 4th card, the turn. 9 spade suit. There were 3 spades, increasing the chances of a flush tremendously. However, Admiral Emirius still didn't hesitate. He calmly pushed a stack of chips. £100. Conus Kilgore's fingers tapped on his hole cards, showing his lack of confidence. But ultimately, he chose to call. Dwayne Dantes glanced at this deputy director once again and maintained his warm smile. Call. At this point in time, he had yet to see his hole cards, making Calvin somewhat worried. He believed that such an act was going overboard, a clear act of throwing money away. It wasn't something Admiral Emirius, who was relatively conservative, might find acceptable. At this moment, the red-vested croupier revealed the final card, the river, 2 club suit. As such, the community cards took form: 2 spade suit, 9 heart suit, K spade suit, 9 spade suit, 2 club suit. £200. Admiral Emirius pushed a pile of metal chips in with an extremely domineering attitude. Conus Kilgore took a deep breath before pushing 2 stacks of chips. £500. This amount of money was half of his purported annual salary. Is he trying to bluff? Calvin and Mocked exchanged looks, believing that Brigadier General Kilgore had made it too obvious, making it easy to see through him. One had to know that when playing Texas Hold'em, apart from doing risk management and probability calculations, it also involved psychological battles most of the time. Be it in terms of body language, expression, or the style used for raises, they made it easy to expose one's hidden cards. Of course, good players could also use these details to deliberately misdirect their opponents. Dwayne Dantes sized up Conus Kilgore before he laughed. Then, like the previous few times, he said, "Call." Emirius raised his hands, prepared to push all his remaining chips, to pressure his opponents into folding. At this moment, he suddenly paused. His deadpan expression wore a look of solemnity. After a few seconds of silence, he calmly said, "Call." At this point, the whole cards could be revealed to compare each person's hand. Admiral Emirius flipped his card first. It was an A spade suit and 10 spade suit. It formed a flush with the 2 spade suit, K spade suit, and 9 spade suit. It was a rather high-ranking hand, with the only ones bigger than it being a full house, 4 of a kind, straight flush, and royal flush. "It's your turn," Emirius then urged Conus. Conus first flipped open a single card, K diamond suit. It made 2 pairs with the K and 9 from the community cards. Following that, he picked up his second hole card. At that moment, the remaining poker cards at the red-vested croupier's end blurred. Pa! The whole card was flipped open, revealing itself. 9 club suit. "What?" Mocked and company exclaimed, hardly believing their eyes. This meant that Conus Kilgore had obtained a full house. 9s over kings. It was bigger than a flush. "Sorry about that." "Full house." Conus looked at Emirius and said with a smile. Then, he turned to look at Dwayne Dantes. "You can reveal your cards. I'm also very curious as to what my cards are." Dwayne Dantes smiled. He picked up the metal chip that he had placed down on his cards and very casually flipped the 2 whole cards. What? Calvin and company rubbed their eyes. Dwayne Dantes' whole cards were a very weak pair. 2 heart suit, 2 diamond suit. There happened to be a very small pair in the community cards. 2 spade suit, 2 club suit. They formed a 4 of a kind. The smallest rank when it came to 4 of a kind, but it was higher rank than all the full houses. Praise the lady. Dwayne Dantes drew the crimson moon across his chest in pleasant surprise, looking as though he had never expected it. An interesting round. Emerius was taken aback for a moment before he gently clapped. Conas Kilgore gave Dwayne Dantes a deep look and said with a laughing sigh, I never expected the final winner to be you. Klein wiped the smile from his face as he inwardly grumbled, It's only right that I win over the 2 of you. On the one hand, Admiral Emerius enjoys pressuring others and doesn't really rely on his Beyonder powers to cheat. As for you, you placed your focus and Beyonder powers on Admiral Emerius, thus ignoring me. On the other hand, the one playing cards with you is actually named Winner Anuni. Without even looking at his whole cards, it was obvious that he was relying solely on luck. At the moment he placed his chip on the whole cards, Klein had already swapped positions with Anuni as they switched faces with each other. Although Colonel Calvin had gotten him to deliberately lose £1,000, Klein decided to win a killing after he saw Conas Kilgore. This wasn't because he couldn't bear to part with the money. Instead, his main motive was to garner the attention of this MI9 demigod. He wanted to get familiar with him and build relationships. Only by doing this could Klein have an opportunity to obtain intelligence from Conas Kilgore, and even carry out an assault on him. After all, he was a demigod. To deal with him in Backland required sufficient care and caution. He would rather give up an operation if he lacked the confidence to guarantee a kill or lure him away from Backland. Otherwise, he was bound to expose himself, ending up being surrounded by demigods and even angels in Backland. In the subsequent rounds, Klein won and lost different rounds. In the end, not only did he keep his £1,000 in chips, but he had even won nearly an additional £1,000. During this process, Calvin had gestured to Dwayne Dantes to lose, but he was left stupefied by the latter's ridiculous good luck that left him undefeatable. After the game came to an end, a person walked over to Dwayne Dantes with a smile. Conas Kilgore. 1 big blind is equal to the minimum bet. 2 the small blind is normally half the big blind. Chapter 998 Establishing Relations with Dark Blue Eyes. Conas Kilgore, who had crew-cut hair which was seldom seen among members of high society, held a cup of champagne as he walked up to Dwayne Dantes. He said with a smile, You had great luck today. You also had plenty of courage. One if he's referring to me immediately folding after receiving a bribe, with me rather losing a big blind, that's not luck but knowledge. As for the other times, playing cards with all of you has pretty much drained all of Anuni's recently accumulated good luck. Klein swirled the cup with pale golden alcohol in his hand and said with a laughing sigh, For a person who doesn't care about the outcome, there's naturally nothing to fear. Heh, praised the lady. He was using a loan-style euphemism to indicate that he was mainly here to lose money, and that his good luck was all thanks to the blessings of a deity. It had nothing to do with himself. Conas hadn't lost much tonight, approximately £100 to £200. Although this was already a considerable amount when compared to his purported salary, to a Brigadier General Deputy Director of MI9, a hidden demigod, his salary was the most trivial part of his income. Therefore, he didn't mind it. He shook his head with a smile. Humans often have no way of seeing through the arrangement of fate. You are an interesting person. It's a pleasure to meet you. His final sentence was both a form of praise and also a part of the formalities. It indicated that their conversation was over. However, Klein had acted all night to acquaint himself with this demigod of the Black Emperor pathway, so how could he give up? He first replied, It's my pleasure as well. Then, he asked in a seemingly random manner, Your Excellency, are you familiar with the manners in the Backland suburbs? It's best if they come with forests for hunting. According to the information Klein had received from Miss Justice, Conas Kilgore didn't enjoy holding banquets, balls, or saloons at his place. Neither did he accept invitations on such matters. It was unknown if it was a problem with his character or due to his job. He had very simple hobbies. First, he enjoyed smoking cigars, especially Chieftain cigars from East Balham's Mike, recognized as the best cigars in the world. Second, he enjoyed playing cards, especially Texas Hold'em. Third, he enjoyed hunting. He often headed to the Backland suburbs during autumn and winter. He even headed to Awa County or East Chester County for hunting. Klein was already planning on buying a manor, an expenditure meant solely to integrate himself into high society. He hadn't made any decisions yet, but after meeting Kona's Kilgore today, he suddenly added this request in a bid to garner his interest. When the time came, he could even invite this MI9 deputy director to hunt in the suburbs over an enjoyable weekend. He could then seek out an opportunity to take action. Kona's Kilgore drank a mouthful of champagne and said after some thought, "I'll help you take note of it. If there's anything suitable, I'll send someone over." Buckland Street, right? Yes, someone will inform you there. Thank you very much, Klein earnestly replied. At the same time, he pitied his former valet, Richardson, who had now become an assistant butler. This young man who wished to better himself recently went out early in the morning and returned late at night. He had been gathering information about manors in Backland suburbs, filtering out those that met the requirements and the ones which were on sale. He had been personally visiting them in a bid to list down options which were all flawless. He didn't wish for his employer to spot something he fancied only to find out that it wasn't for sale, or that the actual conditions were far worse what was described. And after Klein suddenly changed his request, all the work that Richardson had done was undoubtedly made useless. The all-evil party in contracts always changes their requirements and requests. Yes, after this is done, I'll get Taneja to raise his annual salary by £5. As an assistant butler, he should naturally earn more than his time as a valet. £5. It was gone in just 1 or 2 raises in today's game. Richardson's annual salary is only enough to play a few rounds of Texas Hold'em. Klein sighed inwardly when he sensed eyes looking at him. He directly looked back and realized that it was Admiral Emerius Revolt. This old-fashioned and stern middle-aged man nodded gently and retracted his gaze. He had no intentions of communicating with Dwayne Dantes, nor did he get anyone to arrest this unaffiliated beyonder. After all, he was considered a working partner of the military, and it wasn't rare for a merchant, an adventurer with wide connections, to be able to obtain a potion. At this moment, Colonel Calvin and Member of Parliament Mocked walked over to Dwayne Dantes with wine glasses in hand. "What happened?" Calvin asked with an exasperated and suppressed voice. As Dwayne Dantes had won nearly £1,000, he and Mocked had to change their strategies to prevent Admiral Emerius from losing any money. They went from a tight strategy to an unrestrained one. They felt quite the pinch from losing several £100 each. As such, adding to everyone's losses, Admiral Emerius had won a total of nearly £300. With regards to this, Klein spread his hands. "I didn't even look at my whole cards." In between the lines, he meant that this was simply the blessings of some deity that controlled luck. At the moment, the deities, angels, and secret existences who had authority in the fate domain included, but were not limited to, the Evernight Goddess, the Fool, Snake of Mercury Willosepton, Pallas Zoroast, Blasphemer Amon, and Snake of Fate Ouroboros. "This is really such a vexing matter," Mocked said with a bitter smile while shaking his head. "Calvin and I don't even dare to return home after what we've lost." They had roughly lost about half their purported annual income. Dwayne Dantes, with grayed sideburns, revealed a surprised look. "When did you guys lose?" He then pointed at the pile of chips at his seat. "I just happened to retain the £1,000 I bought in at the beginning. The rest are yours. Isn't that so?" 1. Calvin and Mocked were taken aback as they exchanged looks. Then they revealed smiles. "We must have counted wrongly due to the anxiety." Calvin gave an approving nod. Klein laughed and immediately changed the topic. He then began looking at supper that was placed on the coffee table beside him. City of Silver, in the spire of one of the Twin Towers. Derek Berg once again met the chief of the 6-member council, Colin Iliad. "You said that you have something you would like to ask me about?" Colin, who had quite a number of old scars on his face, calmly asked the youth who wasn't considered too tall. Derek bowed and replied frankly, "Yes, Your Excellency. In the advancement for Priest of Light, I need pure darkness, but once I do it, it will be extremely dangerous. I'm wondering if there are any solutions." Colin Iliad listened seriously before nodding. "You have to confirm one point. Is it pure darkness, or darkness with zero light? These two concepts are very different. If it's the latter, you can obtain that in the Spire's underground dungeons. You've been there for some time, so you should know what I'm talking about." Derek had a deep fear for the Spire's dungeons because it was there that he first met Blasphemer Amon. Not only did he see the former captain of the expedition team, but he had even been parasitized. Unless it was necessary, he really didn't wish to recall it. At this moment, after receiving the chief's reminder, he began to slowly jolt his memories. He discovered that, under the spire, although each cell was given candles, one would have to wait for the guards to deliver food and medicine and ask for more once they finished burning. This didn't happen frequently, with it happening only thrice a day with the gaps in between being very long. And in such an environment, phenomena like the appearance of monsters and the vanishing of humans never appeared. Derek recalled that he had been in darkness with zero light for some time without encountering any danger. He pondered for a moment and hesitantly said, "The darkness with zero light at the bottom of the spire has external powers involved?" It was this power that prevented the darkness from making people disappear or producing monsters. Colin Iliad looked at the two swords that were hung up in a cross-like fashion on the wall. He looked up and sighed. Yes, that's why it's called darkness with zero light, not pure darkness. Derek frowned slightly as he tried to recall. After a few seconds, he said without certainty, "If that's the case, the darkness outside the spire's basement isn't pure darkness as well." In many historical records, the nights before the Dark Ages didn't make people vanish or produce monsters. Now, the darkness must have undergone an abnormal change or had some other forces mixed into it to turn it dangerous. Not bad. For you to make such connections shows that you've improved. Therefore, let me ask you again. Do you need pure darkness or darkness with zero light? Colin's light blue eyes revealed a hint of surprise. Could it be that pure darkness only exists outside the forsaken land of the gods? Derek turned gloomy before he pumped himself up. Your Excellency, I'm not too sure either. I'll take some time to confirm this. He believed that the experienced and strong Mr. Hanged Man, Mr. World, and the other members of the Tarot Club could give him a good solution. Colin Iliad didn't ask further as he said with a nod. Go on then. Once you reach Sequence 5, even if you aren't able to become a demigod for a long period of time, you will have the chance of wielding certain sealed artifacts. 1 Backlund, Hillston Borough, Zio changed into a brown jacket and wore a cap, pretending to be a very ordinary short man. She had officially taken the commission and had begun tailing and investing the gentleman named Ernst Boyar. There were also a few other bounty hunters who participated in this mission. Ernst Boyar lifted his top hat and pointed his cane forward as he instructed the carriage driver, to St. George Borough. It was southeast of Backlund, separated from East Borough by the Tussock River. Once he got on his carriage and took his seat, Ernst sniffed. He looked out the window and suddenly grunted. As a sanguine viscount, how could he not have discovered the clumsy bounty hunters tailing him? Chapter 999 Instigation. When Ernst left on a carriage, the few bounty hunters hiding in the vicinity immediately appeared. Without being stingy about the costs involved, they immediately stopped any rental carriages that passed by. Some memorized the target carriage's traits and attempted to take shortcuts through the cramped, isolated paths to catch up to it. Others rode on the bikes they had prepared ahead of time, swerving through the crowds and carriages with their bells ringing. It was very easy for them to keep pace. Among them, only Zio was completely composed. She remained in her spot, watching Ernst and her peers leave. This transportation tool known as a bicycle is more useful than I imagined. It's no wonder so many bounty hunters have saved up to buy one. This can save expenses from taking carriages and save time walking. If one often has such tracking missions, then the money saved is enough to buy a brand new bike. The only problem is that this mode of transportation tool has very few models available. All of them have high seats. Zio was enticed. At this moment, a tracked carriage drove over from the crossroads and stopped in front of her. Zio happened to be at a station. Glancing at the double-decker that stopped on the iron tracks, Zio took out a few pennies, walked over, and sat down by the window. Such public carriages could seat nearly 50 people with its double decks. It wasn't too crowded, allowing Zio to easily observe the scenery outside. However, she didn't admire the scenery. Her mind was quickly outlining the exact appearance of her target. Brown hair, red eyes, pronounced features, a nose bridge that was so high that it looked deformed, and an oil painting catalog in hand. With her supernatural senses as a sheriff, as well as the distance between them not being too great, Zio could vaguely grasp her target's current location and predetermined destination. Therefore, she remained very calm and even took off her cap while using the glass windows to tidy up her coarse and stubborn blonde hair. After several stations, Xiao suddenly got up when the public carriage came to a stop as she alighted. This was the Backlund Bridge area. She had sensed that the target had already changed direction and was preparing to head towards the bridge. Xiao immediately went on foot, planning to enter another street at the bend up ahead to board the public carriage that headed for the south bank of the Tussock River. She had good luck, with a public carriage driving over just as she arrived at the stop. Xiao silently exhaled and took out another batch of pennies she had prepared. Her urge to buy a bike strengthened. This tracked carriage was very crowded, but with her domineering aura as an arbiter, she was able to easily pass through the crowd, head up to the upper deck, and find a seat. The carriage moved slowly as Xiao casually looked out the window when her gaze suddenly froze. She saw Sherman, who she hadn't been able to find anywhere. This young man who thought himself as a woman was carrying a paper bag with a few long loaves of bread and a stack of newspapers as he entered a narrow alley. His brown shoulder-length hair had grown longer, and his gray patterned trousers seemed tighter. Although his figure disappeared almost as quickly as he appeared, making it impossible for the average person to notice, Xiao, who was a sheriff, easily made the necessary judgment. Sherman stopped renting his place in Eastborough and moved here? Seeing that Sherman was fine and that she was still tracking her target, she held back her urge to jump off the carriage to chase after him to ask him about his recent situation. Sherman carried the paper bag with several long loaves of bread and a stack of papers as he passed through alleys and streets, making a huge detour before entering an apartment building. He followed the cramped stairs to the third story, took out a key, and opened the door to where he lived. He seemed to possess some pretty good anti-tracking skills. With a creak, the door opened as Sherman's eyes lit up. He saw a lady wearing a black dress in front of him. This lady had a sweet, supple face and an impeccable figure. Even while standing at the window and blocking out the sunlight, making herself become cloaked in the shadows, she seemed to be gilded, making her appear holy and beautiful. "Why are you here?" Sherman stared at her in surprise but couldn't help but size her up. His unobvious Adam's apple bobbed up and down as he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. The next second, he turned his head and looked to the side as though he didn't dare look at her head-on. "Ma'am T. Trissy." Sherman stammered a greeting. Trissy slowly smiled as she allowed the poorly lit room to appear to become brighter. Then she asked with a teasing tone, "Why don't you dare to look at me?" I don't know. I won like men. Why do I still have odd thoughts when looking at you?" Sherman continued looking at the ground to his side as he stammered an answer. Trissy's expression immediately turned mixed before smiling as though nothing had happened. Females can also appreciate the charm of beauty within their gender. She paused for a moment before saying, "I came here today because I have a mission for you. Your original progress has been very fast, leaving me very satisfied. But it seems like it has recently stopped." Sherman's face immediately wore a look of horror as he subconsciously took a step back. I don't think there's a need to do such things." Seeing Trissy silent, Sherman's gradually eloquently stringed his words. "I really don't wish to instigate others into stealing, robbing, and murdering. That's too evil, too despicable. Even at the very beginning, those people you got me to assassinate seemed to be a little overboard. Although they had indeed cursed me, beat me, ostracized me, and spread bad rumors about me, using all kinds of means to harm me in exchange for joy, their actions didn't require them to pay with their lives." Unsurprised, Trissy smiled and said, "That's not what you said back then. You hated them and had wicked feelings for them. Once you obtained Beyonder powers, you were so eager to seek revenge on them. I just made a tiny suggestion, and you planned several assassination missions. I always remember how you looked stained with blood, trembling in excitement and fervor." Sherman couldn't help but retreat as he heard that until he was stopped by the door which had closed at some point in time. He then covered his face with his hands, shouting, "No! I have nightmares every night, dreaming of them surrounding me, covered in blood. They chase after me, bite me, paw." The paper bag fell to the ground as the long loaves of bread were scattered. The stack of newspapers happened to drop just beside them. "This is very normal." Trissy cut off Sherman. "This is a necessary psychological change for an assassin. Think about it. Didn't you wish to kill them when they were bullying you?" "Yes," Sherman answered hesitantly. Trissy then chuckled. "Just treat it as self-defense when being bullied. Thus, killing them." Her speech had a natural allure that made one wish to listen and believe. Sherman rapidly calmed down and nodded. "From this point of view, it does seem much better." Upon hearing that, Trissy's dimples appeared as she teasingly added, "Besides, they weren't your match when they were alive, so what's there to be afraid of when they're dead? Even if they become ghosts or specters, it's nothing. You just need to seriously complete the ritual and consume one more potion, and then you'll be able to burn all those souls to oblivion." But I can't bear seeing people turn ugly, crazy, and evil under my acts of instigation. Sherman still seemed rather unwilling. Trissy indiscernibly curled the ends of her lips as she said with her smile maintained, "Those are evil thoughts they had to begin with. It has nothing to do with you. Even without you, those evil thoughts will erupt at specific moments and situations. Also, the missions I arranged for you are all related to the gangs. Aren't you most aware of what those people are like? Getting them to fracture and kill one another is mercy and kindness for people like you and the innocent people of Eastborough." Sherman subconsciously widened his mouth, swallowing the words he was just about to say. He instantly fell silent. Trissy's eyes swept past him and continued with a soothing voice, "You're just one step away from your target. As long as you complete the remaining ritual, you can drink the third potion to completely become a woman. When that happens, you can use the name Shermaine that you've already picked for yourself. What a nice-sounding name it is, isn't it? Then, you can leave Backland as a woman, heading for Mid-Seashire or Desi Bay where you can begin a brand new life. You will no longer have anything to do with this place. Yes, you will definitely be filled with charm. Many excellent men will court you, and you can choose the one you like the most and are most satisfied with, walking down the aisle in a cathedral. You will have bubbly kids, and you can bring them up to be healthy children. You can bring them to Winter County for skiing, Desi Bay for holidays, and to the hunting grounds which are pleasures that only nobles have. Didn't you say that you were willing to do anything to regain your true self?" Sherman's lips quivered, and after pursing them tightly for a while, he separated them and said, "Ma'am Trissy, I understand. I will proceed according to your instructions." After saying that, he seemed to lose all his strength as he stumbled to the ground. He subconsciously reached out to hold onto a coat rack beside him. During this process, his gaze happened to sweep past the stack of newspapers. It had already spread apart, revealing a particular report. "Tycoon from Desi, Mr. Dwayne Dantes, shows interest in purchasing the Larryway Steel Company, believing that it has excellent profitability and a promising future." "Sir, are you really planning on buying Larryway Steel Company?" Anuni asked while walking upstairs at 160 Buckland Street. Dwayne Dantes shook his head and smiled. "That news is just pure fabrication. I've only met the owner of the Larryway Steel Company, Mr. Phil LaRivie, at a ball last week and had a chat." By the side, Butler Walter heaved a sigh of relief as he warned, "Sir, the Larryway Steel Company is indeed seeking a buyer. There are quite a number of people who are considering the option." "That also means that this piece of news was released by the reporters under Phil's instructions so that he can sell it at a better price?" Klein nodded in thought. He entered the room with the half-balcony and prepared to head up above the grey fog. He wanted to use Anuni's praying point of light to see any abnormalities at Hazel's place. This was something that he had been doing daily for the past few days. Chapter 1000 Prelude in the Grand Palace above the grey fog. Through Anuni's prayer point of light, Klein saw the scene inside his valet's room. As his vision pulled out and slowly extended out, he began taking in all of Buckland Street. Among buildings covered in fresh flowers and grass, Inta's parasol trees that shielded the sunlight slowly swept past. There were slow-moving carriages that were elegantly or beautifully adorned, and youths dashing quickly on bikes. Finally, Klein locked onto Unit 39, Member of Parliament Mocht's residence. He then lowered his field of view and began observing every animal and human to see if there was any black-haired, black-eyed, monocle-wearing man. Phew! There's no switching or grafting of fate. Nearly 10 minutes later, Klein heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, a carriage drove into Mocht's residence and stopped at their doorstep. A young lady with curly black-green hair and bright, dark brown eyes alighted from a carriage. It was none other than Hazel, who had returned home. She was wearing a dark green dress that didn't expose her shoulders. Her lips were slightly pursed, and she wore a relaxed look with a hint of joy. Upon seeing Hazel in such a state, Klein's heart skipped a beat. This was definitely abnormal. From Klein's point of view, the rat demigod had only two outcomes after meeting Amon's avatar. She either had a trump card and managed to escape successfully at the cost of being heavily injured, or she had turned into a Beyonder characteristic to strengthen Amon's avatar. And regardless of the outcome, there was no way Hazel could find her teacher. She would definitely be in grief and pain, feeling dispirited and sad. So how could she be relaxed and happy? With her taking the risk to head to the manor in the suburbs to inform her teacher, she's not a cold and selfish person. Her present state indicates that she has confirmed that her teacher, that rat demigod, is fine. She has even been rewarded, perhaps obtaining all kinds of knowledge about the supernatural world. This is in conflict with my theory of the rat demigod's outcome. No, it's not in conflict. Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. Klein leaned back into his seat and came to a conclusion. Amon had not only obtained the rat demigod's beyonder characteristic, but he had also stolen her fate and had replaced her identity. Therefore, to Hazel, her teacher hadn't encountered any mishaps and would only need a period of time to lie low. After making the confirmation, Klein silently exhaled and felt a little relaxed. To him, the most terrifying aspect of Amon was that no one knew what form or identity he would use to appear. It could be possible that Member of Parliament Mocked would one day wear a monocle, or that insects in the garden would turn around with monocles on their faces. Therefore, after grasping the identity Amon might use to appear, Klein couldn't help but feel more assured. As for Amon's performance being problematic in front of Hazel, Klein believed that it was impossible. After all, Amon was a king of angels that was fundamentally good at deceit. Even if he mentioned something that differed from what the rat demigod had said, he could easily use the excuse of it being a test with what he now said being part of her formal education to fool her. Of course, based on Palez Zorost's depiction, Amon definitely wouldn't appear as a rat demigod, so I shouldn't be careless. Klein did some observations before retracting his gaze and leaving the gray fog. Inside his room, he sat on a reclining chair and drank some black tea with a lemon slice. He half closed his eyes and considered how he could deepen his relationship with Kona's Kilgore. After an unknown period of time, Klein suddenly opened his eyes and activated his spirit vision. At the demigod level, he could already activate it at will. Almost at the same moment, Rionette Tinker walked out of the void with the 4 blonde red-eyed heads in hand. One of them had a letter in its mouth. "Whose letter is it?" Klein asked as he reached out his right hand. "Sharon." Rionette Tinker's other head answered. "Miss Sharon? She should be making her final preparations for the advancement. Why would she suddenly write to me?" Klein was slightly puzzled as he received the envelope. After he opened it, he found very little content. There was only a simple line. Emlyn White is seeking out the Rose School of Thought. Emlyn is seeking out the Rose School of Thought? Klein pricked up his brows in surprise. His opinion of Emlyn was a sanguine who was afraid of trouble. Unless necessary, he didn't even wish to head out. So how could he actively search for the Rose School of Thought? This definitely isn't Emlyn's own will. Yes, Emlyn had mentioned that some important figure of the Sanguine was meeting him. This is a new mission that the Sanguine gave him? It's very possible. However, why didn't he mention it in the Tarot Club? Oh, it was focused on the punishment operation, and he had other clues, so he temporarily kept it from us? Klein thought as he leaned forward. Under the watch of Miss Messenger's 8 eyes, he took out a piece of paper and a fountain pen from his coffee table. He wasn't curious about Emlyn's clues, because it was an obvious matter. Since Miss Sharon knew that Emlyn was seeking out the Rose School of Thought and had asked their mutual friend, Detective Sherlock Moriarty, about this matter, it meant that this Sanguine had likely asked the help of the black market arms dealer, Ian, from the Bravehearts Bar. This also meant that, in Emlyn's previous commissions, he must have noticed Sharon or Marek. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to mention the Rose School of Thought to an ordinary person. I don't know enough about the apothecary pathway. I can't determine how Emlyn discovered a wraith or zombie. Klein crossed his right leg as he placed the letter on his thigh and began scribbling. This is likely a mission the Sanguine's upper echelons gave Emlyn. They hate the Rose School of Thought members who believe in the primordial moon, and they have directed this anger at the other factions of the Rose School of Thought. Upon writing this, Klein paused and added, I suspect that the Mother Tree of Desire has the intention of encroaching onto the authority of the Moon Domain, but I'm unsure why the primordial moon believers would join the Rose School of Thought. This secret existence seems to have a very complicated relationship with the Mother Tree of Desire. They are at odds, but they have also cooperated. It's hard to tell. Putting down his pen and folding the letter, Klein looked at Miss Messenger who had been waiting. He asked with a chortle, How did you know that I'll be replying? One of Rionette Tinker's heads succinctly answered, Inkling. Right on the heels of that, the 4 blonde red-eyed heads spoke one after another. You seem a little livelier recently. Your expression has also become much richer. As Klein pulled out the box that was connected to his golden pocket watch, he took out a gold coin from it and said with a self-deprecating smile, repeatedly wearing a thick mask isn't good for one's mental health. I realized that after becoming a demigod. Therefore, unless he was in situations where he needed to disguise or hide his feelings, he limited the use of his clown's power to control his emotions. Rionette Tinker didn't say a word as the heads bit on the gold coin and letter before vanishing. Watching Miss Messenger leave, Klein leaned back slightly and inwardly muttered, I wonder if Miss Sharon and Marek will use the Sanguine to deal with the Rose School of Thought members in Backland. Miss Sharon is probably focusing her time and efforts on her advancement. She might not involve herself, but I can't be sure about Marek. Emlyn changed into his Church of Earth Mother priest robes, and then wore a red coat and a silk hat before walking out the Harvest Church. He then got into a rental carriage by the roadside. After saying his destination, he casually cast his gaze out the window. At this moment, Emlyn sensed something as he abruptly moved his body, leaving shadowy afterimages in his wake as he moved to the side. Then, he saw a figure appear out of nowhere. It was a young man whose coat wasn't buttoned, revealing the white shirt and black vest within. His brown hair was a little moist and messy as though he hadn't combed it in a while. His brown eyes were filled with temperance, as though he was restraining certain urges deep within his heart. Upon seeing this pale corpse-like face, Emlyn tipped his chin and said with a smile, showing no signs of nervousness, You have finally come. Aren't you afraid that I'm a member of the Rose School of Thought that's here to finish you off? The young man's figure turned somewhat transparent. Emlyn scoffed and said, Would I not be aware of the Rose School of Thought's history? Or matters about the betrayal of the Temperance faction and their escape? Well, how do I address you? Marek, the young man replied. Is this the information you received from the upper echelons of the Sanguine? Emlyn was taken aback as he'd scared. You are smarter than I thought. He used such a remark to confirm the other party's guess. Marek slowly drew a breath and leaned forward slightly. How did you notice our existence from Ian's side? Emlyn leisurely leaned back into the carriage and said with a smile, Humans have the smell of humans. Wraiths have the smell of wraiths. Marek fell silent for a few seconds before asking, You Sanguine wish to deal with the Rose School of Thought members in Backland? The important members, Emlyn replied by making an emphasis. If that's the case, we can use ourselves as bait to help you fish out the Rose School of Thought members. However, I need confirmation. Marek rubbed his eyes and said directly, I know you are unable to make the decision. You can first return to seek permission from the Sanguine. After you obtain their assurance, you know where to find us. Having said that, he handed a dossier in his hand. This is from Ian. It's the initial feedback from tracking Ernst Boyar. Many bounty hunters have completed this together. Emlyn received the dossier and nodded in a rare look of solemnity. Okay. Chapter 1001 First movement. When the wraith in front of him was gone, Emlyn White retracted his gaze, untied the thread on the dossier, and pulled out the documents inside. As he read through them, Emlyn had a rough idea of Ernst Boyar's routine. This Sanguine Viscount had a routine which was rather random, staying at home, out visiting exhibitions, partaking in wine tasting at manors in the city outskirts, shopping at department stores with female companions, or sketching female models. He was like the typical wealthy man. However, Ernst had recently been visiting St. George Borough every other day to monitor the renovations of the furniture factory he had invested in. It was a bid to ensure that it could quickly resume work. This way, the Sanguine Viscount's lifestyle became repetitive. The places he visited, the paths he took, and the places he had lunch were repeated every other day. Emlyn pressed down on his temples, seriously filtering out 3 venues which were suitable for the operation. The first was inside or at the entrance of the furniture factory owned by Ernst Boyar. The second was St. Hireland Square, where he stopped along the way home for a meal and to feed birds. The third place was Backland Bridge. Unless Ernst was willing to take a huge detour, he had to pass by this area when traveling between his home and St. George Borough. These 3 spots meet the requirement of having plenty of people, making it chaotic. However, Backland Bridge has too few entrances and exits. With the 2 ends locked down, one can only leave by jumping into the river, an act only chosen by idiots. St. Hireland Square comes under St. Hireland Cathedral, core to the Church of Steam in Backland, and even the entirety of Lone. It's akin to the second Holy See. It meets Mr. Hanged Man's suggestion. It can effectively prevent conflicts from escalating, and it can interfere with any subsequent divination and investigations. Emlyn gradually had an inclination. And once a living being had an inclination, they would unknowingly seek more reasons to affirm their choice, and Emlyn was no exception, without a doubt. The more he thought about it, the more he was convinced that St. Hireland Square met almost all the requirements. First, Ernst wouldn't stay in the area for too long. He would have lunch at a restaurant with Civilau's cuisine since he was born in Civilau's county. Secondly, there were several tracked carriage stops in the vicinity, making the area filled with traffic on foot. With most of them being people from the lower or middle class, accidents often happened. Thirdly, with it as the origin, one would enter the area south of the bridge if one didn't head to the Backlund Bridge. It would then be close by to the Harvest Church. Finally, at noon, the St. Hireland Cathedral would spew steam, turn its levers, and chime a clock. It was inevitable for everyone's attention to be attracted. It's confirmed. Emlyn quickly made up his mind. Raising his right hand and adjusting his bow tie, his red eyes were filled with anticipation. At this moment, he suddenly frowned, sensing that something wasn't right. St. Hireland Square was just perfect for the job. It was so suitable that almost all the conditions were met. Will Ernst be wary against my revenge? Why would he allow himself to stay in such an environment for such long periods of time? Even if he's stupid enough to not realize it, wouldn't the Earls warn him? The corners of Emlyn's mouth curled up slightly as he understood the reason. St. Hireland Square was the venue the sanguine upper echelons had designated for him. Heh! Emlyn chuckled, keeping his mouth curled. He decided to request Mr. Fool to have a gathering for the few members and also invite Mr. Hanged Man to discuss the plan in detail. This was different from the framework that they had previously decided upon. They needed to consider every detail and consider every problem. At 15 minutes to 12, St. George Borough, St. Hireland Square. In a private room on the third story of a restaurant northwest of the square, a figure stood in front of the window, holding a cup filled with scarlet blood-like liquid. He was leisurely looking at the fountain nearby and the crowds that came and went. He was a lanky person, wearing a formal suit meant for banquets. His light-colored hair that was nearly silver and his bright red eyes combined together to give him a sense of coquettish handsomeness. There was a constant faint smile lining his lips. "My lord, will it really be fine?" Emlyn seems to be different from before. This can be seen from his recent hunt of the primordial moon believers. A middle-aged man in a dark suit walked to the window and said with some hint of worry. The man who had been politely addressed cast his gaze at the square where Emlyn White stood. He was listening to a violinist busking on the street as he chuckled. "Our preparations are enough even against a demigod, much less a kid who hasn't even become a viscount. Besides, we don't really plan on doing anything serious. Our only goal is to identify and make confirmations. This is a lot simpler than preventing certain people from escaping." As he spoke, the man with the light hair and bright red eyes raised his right hand slightly, rotating the ring on his left ring finger. The ring was made of silver, and embedded in it was a strange gem with a ghostly blue hue. On a carriage driving towards St. Hireland Square, Ernst Boyar had his right hand over his left. He naturally rotated the ring on his ring finger that had a ghostly blue gem embedded in it. He casually looked out the window and saw a trackless carriage slowly drive over from afar. A paperboy slightly taller than 160 centimeters had a sling bag across his chest as he peddled his papers along the street. Quite a number of bicycles had replaced the carriages that were often seen last year. They darted through the crowds in St. George Borough. Here, the number of workers wearing light blue or grayish-blue uniforms with hats had far exceeded the number of people in formal suits and top hats. Ernst retracted his gaze as he chuckled. He had no fear about what would happen next. He even looked forward to it. He believed that he had made enough preparations. He wore Oath of Rose on his left hand. It allowed him to share what he saw, heard, and smelled with Earl Mistral from a distance away. It made sure that nothing would go wrong while ensuring that their objective was met. In his inner pocket where his silver pocket watch was, there was a moon paper figurine. These could suffer a single lethal blow or an attack that targeted his soul body. It ensured that he wouldn't suffer any serious injuries or death within a short span of time. He also wore Alcohol Nemesis, a diamond brooch. It kept him brimming with energy with lucidity in his thoughts. It raised his resistance against spells that acted on the body of heart and mind. By his waist was a belt named Moonlight Sash. It could effectively reduce sun and lightning damage. These mystical items were the accumulation of Ernst's wealth or were bestowed by Earl Mistral. It made sure that Ernst was a target that could hardly be quickly finished off or controlled. With the Sanguine Viscount's natural resistance against nightmare-type influences, Ernst was nearly without weakness. Even against a demigod, he could put up a fight as long as the latter didn't reveal their mythical creature form. The only problem is that the negative effects of all these mystical items are quite excessive. Ernst's facial muscles twitched, but he quickly composed himself. The Oath of Rose would make his thoughts appear in Earl Mistral's mind from time to time, and if he kept wearing it for a week without removing it, the pair who had the matching rings might very well end up in love, regardless of gender or race. Moon Paper Figurine was an expendable item. It had nearly zero side effects apart from making the body slightly cold. The Alcohol Nemesis Brooch's problem was that it would deal continuous damage to one's liver and brain. If it was worn for excessively long periods of time, it might result in one losing one's thoughts and logical reasoning. Therefore, one had to take it off for 15 minutes after every half an hour of equipping it. Once Moonlight Sash was worn, it made all senses much sharper, making it easy for one to see and hear things one shouldn't see or hear. At the same time, the wearer would feel itchy at intermittent intervals. Let's hope they don't cower in fear and that this doesn't drag on. Ernst Boyar checked on his condition once again, casting his gaze of anticipation at the St. Hireland Square's entrance nearby. On the other end of St. Hireland Square, Emlyn White, who was taking in the sights of the buskers on the streets, suddenly looked up at a bird that flew over. Following that, he raised his hand to press down on his top hat. Bowing his head slightly, he briskly walked to the middle of the square, approaching the fountain. In this process, Emlyn's figure kept moving as he mixed into the crowd. However, this failed to avoid Earl Mistral's tracking. This sanguine earl with silver hair rotated the ghostly blue gem ring on his left ring finger and coldly said, "Take note." At the entrance of St. Hireland Square, Ernst Boyar grew increasingly pumped. He knew that the operation was about to come finally. Emlyn still chose St. Hireland Square after all. Ernst cast his gaze out the window once more, warily watching the pedestrians on the street, the trackless public carriages that were about to pass him, the ordinary paperboy who was peddling his papers, and the elegant windows of the surrounding houses and shops. He didn't believe that Emlyn's potential partners were hiding in there, because there were even more, better spots in St. Hireland Square that made it conducive to take action. However, he still kept up the required level of wariness. Suddenly, his body lunged forward slightly as he nearly got out of his seat. The carriage he was on had stopped without any warning. Right on the heels of that, the horses that pulled the carriage seemed to be in a nightmare as they raised their front hooves, struggling wildly, flipping the carriage to the ground. During this process, Ernst Boyar actually had ample space, time, and strength to help the carriage driver control the berserk horse. However, he didn't do so, because he saw a transparent wolf-shaped specter jump over from outside the window. It had thrown a rose within its body. A rose! Ernst Boyar's eyes widened as the carriage toppled. He hurriedly jumped to the side and out the carriage as he made an illusory and incorporeal black chain extend out of the void. It wrapped around the wolf-shaped specter. With a soft poof, the wolf-shaped specter dissipated without a struggle. And when Ernst Boyar found his footing, he stood there motionless, his eyes turbid. He had already been pulled into a deep sleep. In a trackless public carriage that passed him by, a black-haired, green-eyed young man wore a thin trench coat. His back was facing the middle of the street as he focused on reading a notebook with a green bronze hard cover. Around him, the other passengers were either reading the papers or chatting. Some were looking out only to see the berserk horse quickly recover. With a whoosh, the black-haired, green-eyed man flipped the page of the notebook. The trackless carriage continued forward and gradually distanced itself. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.